Chapter 452. Silence. There was pin-drop silence. Nobody had anticipated that this could be the outcome. Chi Tian had been overbearing. He had suppressed the peers of his generation of the Fire Cloud Cave in order to participate in this competition. So, he had arrived here with the thought of winning this championship. The owners of Barbarian God's real body had become champion many times in the past. However, he had been killed by Yi Shiwen's sword. It was an extremely miserable situation. The Barbarian God's real body had won this championship countless times in the past. They at least hadn't been killed even if they hadn't won the championship. And none of them had been crushed like this without having any power to fight back. Yi Shiwen had nearly made the history in this generation. This generation's Barbarian God's real body wasn't the weakest, just like the Barbarian God's real body of the past generations. It was above average to say the least. However, Yi Shiwen had swept him away as if he was nothing and had eventually killed him. In fact, Chi Tian couldn't even match Yi Shiwen, apart from the beginning of the battle when they were probing each other's strength. Good. Very good. The complexion of the Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave had turned grim. He sat down after he had watched this scene in front of him and had spoken with a sneer. The Supreme Lord of the true Martial University still had no expression on his face. Nobody knew what he was thinking. He was neither happy nor angry. However, the face of the Lord of Muddy Sky Island exposed the trace of a shocked expression. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen could have such strength. However, a calm expression quickly got restored on his face. He still had a lot of confidence on Emperor Chun. After all, Emperor Chun possessed the spatial ability, so he already stood at the invincible position. Yi Shiwen was certainly very powerful, and he had acquired a whole new level of respect and admiration in his eyes by now. However, he wasn't anxious even now. The Lord of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall was seated beside him. He seemed to be feeling very disgusted on the contrary. It seemed as if he had eaten a cockroach. His facial expression had turned ashen. He had been extremely excited a moment ago. He had even gone out of his way to say that Yi Shiwen wouldn't be able to win, and that all the experts of the true Martial University would be eliminated from the competition. However, he hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would give a tight slap on his face not long after this declaration of his. In fact, Yi Shiwen had shown him stars in bright daylight. He had also said that Yi Shiwen wasn't a match for Chi Tian and would get killed. However, the situation had reversed. Yi Shiwen hadn't died. Rather, Chi Tian had. Moreover, Yi Shiwen had displayed formidable fighting strength. So, he had gotten scared in his heart. He wasn't calm and composed like the Lord of the Muddy Sky Island because Twin Stars brothers didn't possess spatial ability like Emperor Chen. So, they weren't standing at the invincible position like Emperor Chen. Yi Shiwen had won. So, the Twin Stars brother would face Yi Shiwen in the next fight if they would also win this round. This had already been decided by the competition's chart. The more formidable strength Yi Shiwen would reveal, the more dangerous that would be for the Twin Stars brothers. The complexion of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall's lord turned exceptionally ugly as he thought about this. I hadn't expected that Yi Shiwen would win. What did you not expect? Each of these Heaven's Pride expert is more powerful than the other. It's quite normal for any of them to win. Who knows what kind of strength they must be hiding deep down. Had you thought that Emperor Chun would possess spatial ability before his fight with Qin Wang? You hadn't thought that Yi Shiwen could effortlessly defeat Chi Tian. But he ultimately killed him. Yeah, Chi Tian and Qin Wang were completely different from each other. Chi Tian had been ranked below the Xian Yuan Twin Stars brothers and Emperor Chen. However, Yi Shiwen has managed to defeat him in an effortless manner. Yi Shiwen's strength is truly intrepid. In fact, it's simply beyond your imagination. And just look at him. He looks quite relaxed. It's obvious that he hasn't used his full strength. So, it's too early to say who would win this competition. The disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave felt extremely disheartened after they witnessed the death of Chi Tian at the hands of Yi Shiwen. The Fire Cloud Cave's run in this competition had come to an end along with Chi Tian's defeat. Yi Shiwen had smoothly entered the semifinals after he had killed Chi Tian. He had now become one of the top 4 contenders, while Chi Tian had gotten eliminated from the competition in the quarterfinals. And most importantly, the disciples of the Fire Cloud had seen this battle with their own eyes. Yi Shiwen hadn't used any tricks. He had thoroughly defeated Chi Tian using pure strength. This had left them speechless. They obviously didn't wish to admit this. However, they couldn't say anything against Yi Shiwen at this time. Yi Shiwen had thoroughly established his might and influence in this fight. Nobody dared to look down upon him anymore. Initially, people were only talking about Emperor Chun or Xian Yuan twin stars brothers when they were debating the winner. However, they must add Yi Shiwen in that list now. Moreover, the Xian Yuan twin stars brothers were Yi Shiwen's next opponents. The list of the 4 semi-finalists was out. In fact, Yi Shiwen wasn't the one to end this round at the earliest. Rather, it was Emperor Chen. Emperor Chen's opponent was Si Demon Jin Wushang. Both of them belonged to the same sect. Therefore, these two men didn't fight. Si Demon Jin Wushang merely laughed and surrendered. The fight didn't even take place. Consequently, Emperor Chen won the fight at the earliest. This was followed by Yi Shiwen. He had effortlessly defeated the incredibly strong Chi Tian. Everyone had been very optimistic about the Xian Yuan twin stars in their fight against Han Bingwang. However, they had to struggle a lot. He had always been low-key and mysterious, even more so than Yi Shiwen. However, it was hard to get hold of him, and he disappeared right after his fight ended. He had displayed tyrannical strength this time. The Xian Yuan twin stars brothers had to go through a lot of trouble in this fight. The microcosm had nearly collapsed under their fight. They had eventually managed to defeat Han Bingwang. However, they couldn't kill him. In fact, several people said that the Xian Yuan twin stars brothers wouldn't have been a match for Han Bingwang if they had challenged him 1-to-1 instead as a team. This rumor made the most noise, even more so than Emperor Chen, even though he had advanced easily after Si Demon Jin Wushang had surrendered, or Yi Shiwen, who had effortlessly defeated Chi Tian. In addition, Emperor Chun had easily crushed Qin Wang in the previous round. That was also the first time a Heaven's Pride expert had been defeated. But it could be said that the Xian Yuan twin stars brothers had to face a lot more difficulty to reach the semifinals compared to Emperor Chun and Yi Shiwen, since they had won effortlessly. And it could be said that the presence of Yi Shiwen could increase the obstacles on the twin stars brothers' way to win the championship. Many people were secretly gambling in the true martial university. The rate of Yi Shiwen's victory had already surpassed that of the Xian Yuan twin stars brothers. This also indirectly meant that everyone wasn't optimistic about the victory of Xian Yuan twin stars brothers anymore. It was even more so because the semifinals were tomorrow, and the 4th semifinalist was a dark horse. Nobody had heard of him. He was a disciple of the true martial university. His strength was equal to a quasi-Heaven's Pride expert's. It must be said that he was very lucky that he had reached till here. The debate on who would win and who would lose had become even more intense after the competition had reached the semifinals. The underground gambling houses had especially turned even livelier. These underground gambling houses had the support of a myriad of forces of the true martial university behind them. Hence, the higher authorities had turned a blind eye to them, even though they operated in public. Come, we're going to start now. Bet on Yi Shiwen. The rate is 1 if he wins and 1 if he loses. Bet on the Xian Yuan twin stars. The rate is 1 if they win and 1.5 if they lose. A disciple was announcing the biggest handicap bet on the Metropolis Martial Peak. Many disciples were watching him attentively and were watching the other disciples place their bets. The disciples were present in the surroundings, also went ahead and placed their bets. The disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave, the Muddy Sky Island, and the Xian Yuan Palace Hall were also among them. However, the majority were the disciples of the true martial university. Almost all the disciples of the true martial university had unanimously bet for Yi Shiwen's victory. Yi Shiwen was the only Heaven's Pride expert of the true martial university who was still in the competition. Another disciple of the true martial university was also in the competition. However, they could tell that he wasn't a match for Emperor Chen. The strength of a quasi-Heaven's Pride expert was way below Emperor Chen's. In fact, The difference was so huge that the betting for Emperor Qin's semi-final match didn't even open. There wasn't any suspense in that battle. The dealer would go bankrupt if he were to open the betting for that match. In other words, it was certain that the finals would take place between Emperor Qin and Xian Yuan twin stars brothers, or Yi Shiwen. And that was dependent on the battle between Yi Shiwen and the twin stars brothers. However, it was evident from the odds that everyone was more optimistic about Yi Shiwen's win. However, the disparity between them wasn't very big. Many people had also bet on the Xian Yuan twin stars win, especially the disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace. Nearly all of them had unanimously bet on the Xian Yuan twin stars win. They were determined to have their revenge on Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen's rank had progressed by one position after he had effortlessly defeated Qi Tian. He was now second only to Emperor Qin. I placed my bet on the Xian Yuan twin stars. They've come very far. That Yi Shiwen is like a feather in front of them. He's just an upstart. A disciple of Xian Yuan Palace Hall spoke angrily. The Xian Yuan twin stars used to be everyone's favorites to win the competition until Emperor Qin hadn't displayed his formidable fighting strength. After all, they are two men fighting as a team, so they had been hot favorites to win this competition. However, Emperor Qin had become everyone's favorite after he had displayed his spatial ability. It would be a light if Emperor Qin had become everyone's favorite. After all, he had displayed the spatial ability. He stood at the invincible position as a result. So, this was quite normal. However, Yi Shiwen was nothing. He had only defeated Qi Tian. That's all. In fact, Qi Tian had been placed below the Xian Yuan twin stars in the rankings. So, Yi Shiwen's name didn't have to be placed above the Xian Yuan twin stars even if he had defeated Qi Tian. The twin stars brothers were two individuals at the end of the day. However, even that Xian Yuan Palace Hall disciple might not have noticed when his confidence on the twin stars brothers and his expectations with them had got stuck to only 1 point. The Xian Yuan's twin stars were two men, and Yi Shiwen was alone. Initially, he had thought that they were powerful enough as a team to sweep away their peers. However, he suddenly felt that having more number of people wasn't advantageous anymore. Emperor Qin had used his spatial ability to defeat Qin Wang's counterattack with ease. And Yi Shiwen was so tyrannical that he defeated Qi Tian effortlessly. Both of them had displayed top-notch strength that was far above their peers. However, people generally talked about the 2-to-1 accomplishments when it came to Xian Yuan twin stars. They had greatly benefited from this thus far. However, people were still not very optimistic about them. When did they get reduced to such an extent? To be continued. Chapter 453. The complexions of the Xian Yuan's twin stars brothers had turned ashen when they saw this scene unfold at the gate of the gambling house. This situation had appeared right after their fight. They, like everyone, had abandoned them. They felt like they had been thrown away like a pair of tattered shoes, as if they were of no use whatsoever. Yi Shiwen, it's because of that Yi Shiwen. The twin stars brothers clenched their teeth and spoke up in unison. Their complexions had turned sinister. So, it is the Xian Yuan's twin stars brothers, a somewhat mocking voice sounded from behind them. They turned around to look and saw a young man clad in cyan-colored clothes. He was looking at them with a bright smile on his face. Yi Shiwen, it's you? The twin stars brothers shouted angrily. They had identified this man, and it was none other than Yi Shiwen. I didn't expect to see you here. I guess it's true that enemies often cross each other's path. Yi Shiwen faintly laughed and said. Then he walked past the twin stars brothers. The complexions of the twin stars brothers turned pale as they saw Yi Shiwen. They clenched their teeth so tightly that it seemed as if they would break down. They glared at him with extreme hatred. This was a huge humiliation for them. They wouldn't have faced such humiliation if Yi Shiwen hadn't been there. This was even worse than death for them. However, they had no choice but to watch helplessly as Yi Shiwen walked past them. They couldn't do anything. They could only watch him walk past them. However, they couldn't see that Yi Shiwen had secretly clenched his fist to guard himself against any sudden attack. He was prepared. In fact, he would have killed them on the spot if they had attacked. However, they didn't attack in the end. So, Yi Shiwen relaxed. However, he was also somewhat disappointed. "Can I bet?" Yi Shiwen walked up to that disciple, who was managing the betting, and asked, "Brother, Brother Yi?" That disciple couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Yi Shiwen here. Of course! Even a person like Yi Shiwen wanted to bet. What could one say about the others? "I bet on my own victory." Yi Shiwen calmly said, "That is natural. How much does Brother Yi wish to bet?" The disciple asked. Yi Shiwen would obviously bet on his victory. That was a given. That disciple knew that very well. There was no doubt about it. 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn. Yi Shiwen replied, "What? 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn?" That disciple was suddenly dumbstruck. An ordinary semi-sage expert would belong to the very rich category if he had 100,000 primary spirit dawn. And those who had more than 1,000,000 primary spirit dawn were rarely found in the semi-sage realm, let alone 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn. There wasn't any other person in the semi-sage realm who could have so many primary spirit dawn apart from Yi Shiwen. There were many people who had a wealth of more than 1,000,000 primary spirit dawn. However, that also included different kinds of divine tools and heavenly treasures. Only Yi Shiwen could have such courage to throw away an astronomical amount of 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn, apart from the sage experts, of course. Moreover, any rare personality who had accumulated so many primary spirit dawn wouldn't dare to bet the entire amount in one go. That's because one would lose everything if they lost the bet. Such a huge loss would be enough for a semi-sage expert to commit suicide. Yes, 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn. Yi Shiwen confirmed. The onlookers gasped in admiration as they looked at Yi Shiwen. They couldn't believe that he had bet 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn on his own victory. It indicated that he was very confident. Yi Shiwen looked calm, not because he had a lot of confidence in himself, but because he had no other choice. He had to go all out no matter whether it was against the Xian Yuan twin stars or Emperor Qin. There could only be two outcomes. Either he would kill both of them, or one of them would kill him. These primary spirit dawn would be of no use for him if he were to get killed. However, he would obtain an astronomical amount of primary spirit dawn if he were to succeed in killing them. He would obtain two major rewards as a result. One was an amount of more than 10,000,000 primary spirit dawn he'd get if he won the bet, plus a reward of 10,000,000 primary spirit dawn, which he'd get from the Jade Yang Peak. Then he would get rid of the future problem of the shortage of primary spirit dawn in fell swoop. That's all. That disciple thought that he wouldn't reject any bet irrespective of the amount. After all, Yi Shiwen was a guest at the moment. He was more dazzling than everyone else, but there was no reason to turn him away since he was a guest. "I wish to bet 500 primary spirit dawn. Put 100 under my name. I want to bet 1,000. The disciples who were merely waiting and watching until now also stepped forward and started to place their bets once they saw that Yi Shiwen was so confident about himself. Yi Shiwen was practically the biggest party involved in this gamble. However, he had dared to bet 3,000,000 primary spirit dawn on his own victory. Therefore, they had no reason to not bet. The disciples of the true Martial University especially contributed even more generously in Yi Shiwen's favor. On the contrary, the disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall got very depressed when they saw the true Martial University's disciples betting before their eyes. They said, "Humph, all of you will cry bitterly soon." These disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall looked towards the Xian Yuan twin stars brothers. The two of them were standing at the gate. They were expecting these two brothers to declare their position as well. These disciples would like to support these two brothers if they would compete against Yi Shiwen in this aspect. In fact, these disciples wouldn't mind even if they lost some money over this gamble. After all, they belonged to the same force as these brothers. The Xian Yuan twin stars realized that everyone was staring at them. They didn't know why, but they immediately felt a bit depressed. They imagined themselves throwing away several million primary spirit dawn recklessly. However, the very thought of it paralyzed them. After all, it wasn't a few million spirit stones. It wasn't a few million spirit dawn. It was a few million primary spirit dawn. They wouldn't be worth so much even if they were to sell themselves off. These two brothers had the combined wealth of merely 1 million primary spirit dawn, and their divine tools and heavenly treasures were included in that wealth. So, they wouldn't be able to surpass Yi Shiwen's bid even if their entire wealth would be converted into primary spirit dawn. They differed significantly from Yi Shiwen in terms of wealth. They would only see themselves become a laughing stock in front of everyone even if they were to throw away everything they possessed. And then, they would end up being ridiculed by Yi Shiwen. They would hardly obtain any benefits from it as a result. Their state could only be described as depression. After all, from where did Yi Shiwen obtain so many primary spirit dawn? The true Martial University wouldn't have given him so many primary spirit dawn even if he was a Heaven's Pride expert. That was simply irrational. They thought that Yi Shiwen must have obtained some rewards from the true Martial University. After all, their income mostly came this way. However, they didn't know that Yi Shiwen had obtained the majority of his wealth through a myriad of methods. It wasn't given to him as a reward by the university. Yi Shiwen's energy consumption was huge. How could his cultivation speed have been so fast if he had only depended on the university's rewards and monthly income? He would have been lingering in the half-step legendary realm even now if he had depended on the university alone. They felt like throw away a huge amount too. However, they would be embarrassed in front of Yi Shiwen if they couldn't surpass the mark of 3 million primary spirit dawn. The two brothers shared their feelings with each other. They then came to a mutual decision, turned around, and left. They ignored the ardent gazes of countless disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall behind them as they left. Their ardent looks couldn't make these two brothers to lose face in front of everyone. Yi Shiwen, you'll regret this. The Xian Yuan Twin Stars brothers gritted their teeth in rage as they spoke. They ferociously thought that they must humiliate Yi Shiwen in the battle. The disciples of the true Martial University made a huge noise as soon as they saw the Twin Stars brothers retreat in defeat. They had faced a lot of taunts and scorching satires from the disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall due to these Twin Stars brothers. They had been insulted even more after the defeat of Qin Wang and Hanbin Wang. However, they were feeling proud and elated at the moment. What's great about the Twin Stars brothers? What's rich about them? This is what it means to be rich. Whom are they calling an idol? This is how an idol should be. Yi Shiwen had thrown away 3 million primary spirit dawn in one breath. Whoever dared to challenge him would get a slap on their face. This was 3 million primary spirit dawn. Many sage experts didn't have such wealth. Perhaps Yi Shiwen would have drawn several sage experts to trail behind him if he had revealed his wealth at a place other than the true Martial University. It might be an astronomical wealth for other people. However, even this amount of primary spirit dawn was insufficient to cultivate to the sage realm as far as Yi Shiwen was concerned. His strength was very tyrannical. However, this was truly an endless pile of primary spirit dawn. This statement was no exaggeration. Yi Shiwen could do anything in this world with so many primary spirit dawn in his hand. This wasn't a joke. He could match the speed of exceptional talents in making breakthroughs as long as he had a guaranteed supply of primary spirit dawn. He could even surpass those Heaven's Pride experts without any problem. Many disciples of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall became very depressed as they saw the Xian Yuan Twin Stars brothers leave. And they had no choice but to leave dejected as the cheering voices and mocking laughters of the true Martial University's disciples turned louder. On the other side, the complexions of the disciples of the Muddy Sky Island and the Fire Cloud Cave had become complicated as they saw this scene. It could be said that there were negligible grudges between them and the true Martial University, especially when compared to the hatred between the Xian Yuan Palace Hall and the true Martial University. The disciples of the Muddy Sky Island had a lot of confidence on Emperor Chen. It didn't matter to them how strong Yi Shiwen was. Many people among the disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave were watching Yi Shiwen with immense hatred. Yi Shiwen had killed Qi Tian, and they had lost their hope of winning this competition because of that. They had been turned into mere spectators among the four forces as a result. They could only see the fight between Yi Shiwen and the Xian Yuan Twin Stars and Emperor Chen. However, Yi Shiwen didn't care. He had prepared himself for these things when he had decided to kill his opponents to win this championship. The taller trees in a forest are always the first to be blown by the wind. However, it was finally the time to see what was stronger, the wind or the forest trees. Not being infected by jealousy was mediocrity. The news about Yi Shiwen spending 3 million primary spirit dawn in the gambling house had quickly disseminated everywhere. However, this was merely an interlude in comparison to the long period of oppressive and intense atmosphere that followed. And it became merely another topic for gossip during leisure time. The competition between Yi Shiwen and the Twin Stars brothers was about to take place in this tense atmosphere. To be continued. Chapter 454. The competition among 4 forces had entered the semifinals. Only 4 participants were left. Everyone was paying attention to the news surrounding both the fights at first. However, their attention had mainly started to get focused on Yi Shiwen's fight. They wanted to know if that would be an interesting fight or not. And this was because Emperor Qin's opponent was too weak. The debate on whether Yi Shiwen was more powerful or the Xian Yuan twin stars were stronger had continued ever since they had been paired opposite each other. Yi Shiwen had displayed tyrannical strength. However, Twin Stars brothers were 2 individuals, and each of them was powerful enough to be ranked as a Heaven's Pride expert. Their combined strength could scare a person to death. The people would finally get the answer today. But the supporters of each side hadn't yielded to the other side until now. However, it wasn't the time to decide this verbally anymore. Words had no importance now. Only an all-out battle could decide who was stronger. Several disciples had arrived early in the observation microcosm to watch the fight. And the 4 supreme leaders of the 4 forces had also arrived on time above the tall platform. Each of these 4 forces had lost a great amount of experts in the competition so far. Especially, the True Martial University had lost a peak Heaven's Pride expert named Qin Wang. And the Fire Cloud Cave had lost its only Heaven's Pride expert. However, they must attend the competition no matter how depressed they were. Moreover, their hearts were quite stable. The casualties of these young experts hadn't exceeded their expectations. They would take part in the competition every time in order to win the championship. However, they also came prepared for serious losses. Yi Shiwen had arrived early in the arena today. He was the first one to enter the microcosm. He was calmly waiting for the Twin Stars brothers to arrive. The Twin Stars brothers were surprised to see Yi Shiwen when they arrived. They became somewhat baffled at this. They had collected more and more information on Yi Shiwen as he became more and more famous recently. Some of the information was also about his habits. Yi Shiwen was habitual of arriving late at any place. However, he had unexpectedly arrived early this time. Yi Shiwen, you have come so early today. Are you in a hurry to die? The Twin Stars brothers said as they looked at Yi Shiwen. Then, they suddenly burst into laughter. Yes, I'm in a hurry, but I'm in a hurry to kill you. Yi Shiwen refused to yield and replied, Someone like you will kill us? The Twin Stars brothers sneered and said in unison, Well, you never know until you give it a try. Yi Shiwen replied solemnly. It seemed as if whatever they had said had been completely irrelevant to his ears. The complexions of the Twin Stars brothers had turned callous. They were observing Yi Shiwen. Then they suddenly surrounded him from both sides. The 2 brothers looked exactly the same. The only difference was that one had red-colored beard and the other one had blue-colored long hair. Both of them were handsome appearance-wise. They were tall and slim. A strange light was flashing in their eyes. The powerful energy surged up in their entire bodies. A part of their imposing auras soared up into the sky. Both of them were dreadful experts. Yi Shiwen merely let out a faint smile. His golden divinities began to boil under his feet. A burst of golden waves swept out like mighty waves, and he started to surf on them. You say, who do you think will win this fight? The fight had not begun yet. However, a group of disciples had already begun to make speculations. I guess Yi Shiwen will win. After all, he's so formidable. He had defeated Qi Tian effortlessly. These Xian Yuan's twin stars aren't even worth mentioning. I don't agree with you. After all, Qi Tian was ranked below the Xian Yuan twin stars. And most importantly, they're two individuals. Moreover, one of them possesses the fire spirit, and the other one possesses the water spirit. Such types of physiques don't even appear once in thousands of years. These are also a kind of special physique. They were born with the principle of water attribute and the principle of fire attribute. These are extraordinary principles. These two principles generally repel each other. However, these principles have become compatible with each other since they are twins. A mixture of water and fire would have boundless might. However, no one has been able to compel them to collaborate so far. I hope Yi Shiwen can do that. Attack! The elder brother, Hui Qi, attacked this time. He didn't use any weapon. He merely shot his fist forward. His fists absorbed the clouds in the sky and transformed into a pair of two incomparably massive fists. They then pounded towards Yi Shiwen. This pair of fists was glowing with flames and looked exceptionally terrifying. Yi Shiwen shot his palm upward, and it transformed into a giant golden dragon. It faced upward and roared. Then it soared upward and collided with that pair of fists. It seemed as if the area around that pair of fists had transformed into a world of flames, and the fire principles were twining around the flames. This looked incomparably powerful and profound, as if the ancient god of fire himself was seated within the flames. He was born with the spirit of fire. He had been innately close to the principle of fire attribute. He could feel the principle of fire since childhood. An average person couldn't come close to him in this aspect. The giant golden dragon burst into that world of fire and collided with that god of fire. Bang! The complementary waves of this collision swept out wantonly. The void got shattered under its effect. It ripped open a crack in the space, and it seemed like a dense spider web had been formed in the sky. Many mountains in the surroundings had been flattened since they couldn't withstand such a terrifying impact. Everyone went in uproar. They hadn't anticipated that the fight would become so terrifying in the beginning itself. Many people saw that this collision had happened between the golden dragon and the god of fire. They clearly saw Hui Qi's fist intention and Yi Shiwen's palm intention grappling with each other with all their might. Both of them had comprehended the fist technique and the palm technique to a considerable extent. In fact, they had already comprehended the creative concept. And the most terrifying thing was that their comprehension of the creative concept was at the peak. This meant that both of them possessed complete understanding of their respective moves. In other words, they could display the moves in their original states. Most sage experts couldn't pull that off. This also meant that both of them were determined to kill each other. They didn't wish to let the opposite party survive. Their attacks were peerless killer moves. The fire god stood up from the ground. His eyes emitted dazzling rays of light. He displayed a set of fist techniques. He stimulated the fire attribute principles of the entire world, and they began to boil. He was the god in the midst of this fire world. He was the ruler of this place. Nobody could disobey the principles laid down by him. His fist pounded on the golden dragon. It seemed as if he would seize the dragon with his bare hands. Roar! The golden dragon faced upwards and let out a loud roar. Divine dragon flings its tail. Its long tail swept across. Its speed was extremely quick, similar to that of lighting. It swept out within a split second. The fire god didn't get the time to respond and got hit. The golden dragon had opened a crack in the perfect body of this fire god. The fire god had been whipped away, and he went flying as a result. He had stood firmly on his feet a moment ago. He roared. It was evident that he wasn't willing to give up. The golden dragon once again rushed towards him. It didn't give him any opportunity to breathe. The golden dragon brandished its claws and displayed the coiling dragon palm. This coiling dragon palm came out in the form of a dragon. This palm attack suddenly inspired the very essence of heaven and earth and advanced towards the fire god. Bang! The fire god hadn't anticipated that the golden dragon would pursue him closely and would arrive close to him so fast. He got caught off guard, and that pair of dragon's claws pierced into his chest. Roar! The golden dragon roared and ripped apart that fire god in the sky. Endless rays of light fluttered about in the sky, and the fire principles wailed. The fire god roared after getting torn into two halves. Then, he died a tragic death on the spot. Puff! Huichi suddenly spouted a mouthful of blood and retreated several steps. The fire god had been an incarnation of his fist intention. Therefore, he suffered a huge psychological rebound when the fire god got torn into two halves after his spirit was annihilated. Everyone stared in utter shock. They were watching this exceptionally quick fight between the fire god and the golden dragon. However, it took only a moment for the outcome of this fight to appear before all. It seemed as if this fight between a dragon and a god had reminded them of the fights between the dragon race and the gods of the mythological era, as mentioned in the legends. These fights had continued since the prehistoric era and had lasted till the mythological age. It was a grandiose and disastrous fight. It seemed as if it were a reenactment of fight from that era. This battle had only lasted for a moment, but Huichi had been wounded within such a short time. This had made the spectators extremely excited. Someone had sustained injury in the beginning of the fight. It clearly meant that both sides were resorting to extreme methods against each other. They had a lot of expectations from this fight. They were excited because they were hoping to see a splendid battle. And the way it had started was enough to hint that this might turn out to be a battle that would shake the heavens. Yi Shiwen, you'll die soon. Yi Shiwen suddenly heard a loud shout from his back. A blue-colored gigantic foot suddenly stepped down. It seemed as if it would crush him into meat paste. This gigantic foot was as clear as water. It was dazzling with a scary blue color. It seemed like a foot of some god. It seemed as if it would destroy the world and would extinguish it forever. Of course, it was Huolan's attack. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would turn out to be so terrifying at first. These brothers would always fight together against their opponents. However, they hadn't done so this time, quite simply because they were fed up of other people saying that they could only fight as a team. In fact, many of their Xian Yuan Palace Hall's disciples had become skeptical about them. Could the Twin Stars brothers prevail over a powerful Heaven's Pride expert if they fought one-on-one and not 2-to-1? These two individuals had gone through a lot of troubles when they had faced Han Bingwang. This had portrayed the Twin Stars brothers like a pair of paper tigers. And this rumor had spread everywhere. For a moment, it had seemed as if they didn't possess any skill apart from the advantage of having numerical superiority. This had made them extremely angry. They had discussed this with each other. They must fight with Yi Shiwen one-on-one. It would be better if they could kill him alone, and not as a team. In that case, they would be able to wash the shameful stigma attached to them. However, they hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would be so fierce. They had thought that they could block his attacks, just like they had done with other opponents. However, they hadn't anticipated that Huichi's fist intention would be shattered by Yi Shiwen's palm intention in this fight. To be continued. Chapter 455. The outcome of the fight between Yi Shiwen and Huichi had been revealed within a short period of time. Nobody had imagined that it would be a checkmate situation at such an early stage. Huichi had been injured even quicker than Qi Tian. Huolan gritted his teeth in hatred. Didn't this outcome prove the embarrassing fact that the Twin Stars brothers were worse than Qi Tian? It was rumored that they might not have been able to enter the semifinals if they didn't have the numerical advantage of being twins. This rumor had already been in circulation everywhere, and they would be embarrassed in front of everyone if they were to be defeated by Yi Shiwen. In fact, it didn't matter even if they didn't get killed because they would be ashamed to death in the end. However, Huolan couldn't bear anymore and pounded his foot towards Yi Shiwen as soon as he saw that Huichi had been momentarily forced back by Yi Shiwen. His foot technique was extremely dreadful. In fact, it was powerful enough to trample the entire world. Yi Shiwen finally moved into action. He was very powerful, but not enough to ignore the might of their attacks. He withdrew to evade Huolan's offensive. He then turned around and shot his fist upward towards the sole of the foot. It was just pure fist intention. It had no other additional force attached to it. An extremely tyrannical power swept out. The void got shattered by the fist's attack. The void disintegrated, and a huge crack opened as the fist attack went towards the incoming big foot. Rumble! That big foot was ripped apart in the sky by Yi Shiwen's fist attack. Hualan suddenly screamed. His leg had nearly been broken by Yi Shiwen's fist attack. Blood was dripping from his leg, and he was left to scream to no end. However, he had fortunately withdrawn in time. Otherwise, his entire body would have been torn apart by Yi Shiwen. He looked at Yi Shiwen in disbelief. He couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen's body was so intrepid. He had fought with people who possessed strong bodies in the past. Even his own body had the water spirit. Therefore, his own body was extremely tyrannical. He had often used his body to bully and humiliate other people in his previous fights. The spirit of fire and the spirit of water didn't have the traits of an intrepid body. However, they were still far more tyrannical than an ordinary physique type. In fact, it was no less than a case of courting death for an average person to challenge them. However, they had never fought against any well-known special physique. They hadn't given any attention to Qi Tian. After all, he had been effortlessly defeated by Yi Shiwen. So, he was nothing more than a weak loser in their eyes. And they had thought that any such loser couldn't be compared with them. However, they had realized how strong Yi Shiwen was after they had started this fight. He was like a golden god of war and possessed dreadful fighting strength. Everyone was stunned. Yi Shiwen had surprisingly wounded both the Twin Stars brothers within a short time. Such fighting strength was enough to scare anyone to death. Many people have been quite optimistic about Yi Shiwen before the start of this contest. After all, Yi Shiwen's accomplishments look more splendid compared to those of the Twin Stars brothers. He had effortlessly defeated Qi Tian, a fighter who had been placed third in the rankings. Most people had guessed that the Xian Yuan Twin Stars brothers couldn't be Yi Shiwen's opponents. However, they hadn't thought that it would happen so quickly. How's this possible? How can they be wounded so quickly? They really differ by far from Qi Tian. It seems they had earned such a big reputation by fluke. A disciple spoke up in utter disbelief. He couldn't believe that Yi Shiwen had used only one move to wound the Twin Stars brothers, since these two used to be favorites to win this competition. The complexions of several disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave had turned ugly as they saw the disciple of the Muddy Sky Island who had said this. He had spoken that about the Twin Stars brothers. However, these words were also demeaning towards the deceased Qi Tian. However, a lot of people acknowledged his words as well. They couldn't understand why the Twin Stars brothers, who were definitely more tyrannical than Qi Tian as a team, looked so weak in front of Yi Shiwen. Even their performance was much worse than that of Qi Tian's. This had simply subverted their observations regarding these three individuals. Yeah, how there can be such a big disparity between them. This is unbelievable. Someone complied in disbelief. What's strange in that? Qi Fifan was also watching this fight from the crowd. He sneered and continued, "That's right. The Twin Stars brothers are more powerful than Qi Tian as a team. However, they aren't fighting as a team at the moment. These two idiots don't understand that they become extremely powerful when they attack together. But they're nothing if they attack separately." Qi Fifan had stated the truth. Even he could have killed them effortlessly if he were to fight with any one of them. The Twin Stars brothers were very ferocious when they fought as a team. Elites such as Yi Shiwen and Emperor Chen wouldn't be afraid even if they had to face two Heaven's Pride experts at once. This was so because 1 + 1 didn't necessarily mean 2. However, the Twin Stars brothers were different. They were twins. Their hearts were connected to each other. So, their collaborated attacks carried endless might. They had the means to be ranked among the top Heaven's Pride experts, and they were counted as one. However, these so-called powerful Twin Stars brothers were nothing more than an ordinary lamb when separated. Even Qi Fifan was quite powerful. He hadn't participated in this competition. However, his strength might not be less than that of Qin Wang. In fact, he was confident that he could compete against Emperor Chen if the man didn't use the spatial ability. He was unable to participate in the competition. However, he had been watching it since the beginning. He had confidence in Yi Shiwen. Only he had seen how Yi Shiwen had slaughtered two Heaven's Pride experts in a breath. One must understand that a Heaven's Pride expert was 100 times more heroic and powerful than a quasi-heaven's pride expert. Nobody could rival Yi Shiwen's aggressiveness, and he hadn't even displayed his entire strength so far. He could even find some means to deal with Emperor Chun. The two brothers realized that they couldn't deal with Yi Shiwen separately after they had faced his extremely powerful attack. They had tried to do so a moment ago, but they had soon understood that it didn't matter how high-handed they thought of themselves. They couldn't even withstand one blow his attack. Both the brothers let out huge roars in unison and decided to launch an attack at Yi Shiwen. However, how could Yi Shiwen let them succeed in their plan? He shot his fist towards Huichi to kill him. It seemed as if his fist would break down the world into pieces. A pair of strong, iron-like fists pounded towards him. His fist attack far more gorgeous than Huichi's fist attack from a moment ago, and it carried endless might. It then went straight towards Huichi for the kill. Huolan and Huichi had planned that they would attack Yi Shiwen first. However, they had lost their rhythm in confusion since Yi Shiwen had attacked first, and had gained an upper hand as a result. Huichi could only resist Yi Shiwen's attack. So, he shot a pair of red fists forward to face the incoming fist attack. Rumble! A huge explosion occurred. Those strong fists collided in the sky. The void had been shattered within a split second. The earth trembled endlessly, and the chaos leaked out. A dreadful force swept across and went swirling in the air. The mountains had been shattered and reduced to powder by the adverse shock waves. Crunch, a loud sound of breaking of bones sounded. Huichi's arms had been broken by Yi Shiwen. He screamed as the blood splashed out and the bone fragments swirled in the air. Bang! Huichi was sent flying by the explosion. He then crashed into the ground and opened a huge crack therein. Brother! Huolan looked at Yi Shiwen with his round and glaring eyes. He had already arrived in front of Yi Shiwen to attack by now. He launched a kick towards Yi Shiwen. His kick set off a monstrous power as it went towards Yi Shiwen's waist. Bang! Huolan kicked Yi Shiwen on his waist. But only the sound of the collision between metals echoed as a result. It seemed as if he had kicked an iron wall. He felt that his leg had gone numb. Everyone held their breath when they saw this scene. Yi Shiwen's body was far too strong. Even the body of some Heaven's Pride expert would have split into two halves by this kick of Huolan's. However, it couldn't even budge Yi Shiwen. Such strength was too horrifying. Yi Shiwen sneered. He regained his composure and shot his fist. Rumble, a loud sound of breaking of bones, sounded along with a big explosion. Huolan's legs had been smashed by Yi Shiwen. His body also crashed into the ground, just like Huichi's. Yi Shiwen didn't stop. His aura began to boil. His body moved like a lightning, and he stamped his foot upon Huolan's body. Huolan's body collapsed under Yi Shiwen's attack. His body had been broken into two parts. Even the ground was disintegrated by this attack, and two huge chasms spread far away into the distance. It was an exceptionally terrifying spectacle. Huolan is dead. Everyone was dumbstruck. They had never dreamt that they'd see Yi Shiwen trample Huolan to death. They were more optimistic about Yi Shiwen than they were about these two brothers. However, they still felt that the Twin Stars brothers should have been able to hold their own against Yi Shiwen, even if Yi Shiwen was more powerful than them. They had anticipated that the Twin Stars brothers would be able to retreat even if they weren't as good as Yi Shiwen, and they would definitely go through a bloody battle before they succumbed to their deaths in the fight. People had expected that Yi Shiwen would have to face great difficulties in killing them, and there was also a possibility that he might get killed. Such expectations had been playing in their minds. However, Yi Shiwen's performance had undermined their imaginations. Yi Shiwen's fighting strength was far too tyrannical. No, rather than saying that Yi Shiwen was far too strong, it would be better to say that the Twin Stars brothers' one wrong decision had ruined them. It had cost them their lives. Young brother! An intense, killing intention flashed in Huichi's eyes. He was burning with rage. However, he had also been blasted into the ground. So, he was also in a bad situation like his brother had been, and he too had nowhere to go. In fact, things had already gone out of his control. A massive hand, as big as the sky, covered him as it pounded upon him. Rumble! The big hand shattered the entire mountain and flattened the entire area. Qi also got annihilated by this attack. How's it possible? No! The lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall shouted in anger as he saw this scene. He suddenly stood up from his throne. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would kill the twin Stars brothers. This had overturned his calculations and spoiled his plan. Suddenly, a figure stormed into the microcosm while everyone was still in shock. To be continued. Chapter 456. Everyone was shocked. They had been optimistic about the twin Stars brothers. In fact, the two brothers were the favorites to win this competition. However, they had been effortlessly killed by Yi Shiwen despite that. Such a battle had astonished everyone. It would have still been fine if the twin Stars brothers had been defeated. However, they shouldn't have lost so easily. This had completely undermined their expectations, to the extent that they couldn't accept this for a moment. It was already too late by the time the lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall shouted. Yi Shiwen wasn't going to stop anyway. Moreover, Yi Shiwen also knew that he couldn't recklessly interfere in the end. He could only watch in helplessness as Yi Shiwen killed the Xianyuan twin stars. He looked bitterly at Yi Shiwen and then sat down in anger. This was the so-called a murderer must be sentenced to death. It was hard to tell how many experts had died at the hands of the Xianyuan twin stars. And they too would have wished for this if they had been in his place. It's unbelievable. Yi Shiwen has become the most terrifying expert in this competition. He possesses such frightening fighting strength. He had destroyed the offensive of the third-ranked Qi Tian very effortlessly, and he had thoroughly defeated him in the end. And now, he has effortlessly crushed the Xianyuan twin stars brothers. It's quite hard to describe his accomplishments in words. Someone spoke up in astonishment. Yeah, the Xianyuan twin stars brothers didn't even get the opportunity to collaborate. Each of them was far superior to an ordinary Heaven's Pride expert. But they crumpled like paper in the hands of Yi Shiwen. In fact, they were gently crushed and thrown into the trash can. They couldn't pose any threat to Yi Shiwen. It can be said that they lost because they couldn't collaborate. However, does this mean that they could only defeat an opponent by relying on their numerical advantage? Were they only like a paper tiger if separated? Someone dared to open his mouth. Many people were praising these two rising stars of the Xianyuan Palace Hall before the contest had started. However, such an outcome had made them sad. Therefore, they could only sigh with sorrow at this time. Hee. So, the Xianyuan Palace Hall spent a hefty price and made it possible for these two individuals to fight as a team because they probably knew that these two were good for nothings on their own. They were merely like a pair of paper tigers. A true Martial University's disciple coldly laughed and said, "The Xianyuan Palace Hall and the true Martial University could be described as arch-enemies among the four forces." So, true Martial University's prestige had risen because of such an outcome, while the Xianyuan Palace Hall had lost their pride. How could this not get the disciples of the true Martial University excited? Especially when they were already quite enraged since the Xianyuan twin stars brothers had said so many insulting words to Yi Shiwen. Many disciples of the Xianyuan Palace Hall were present around that disciple. They looked at each other with glaring eyes when they heard his words. It seemed as if they would attack him. However, they also found a considerable amount of ill expressions in the eyes of many disciples of the true Martial University. So, they had no choice but to let their anger drop. Yi Shiwen is the biggest dark horse in this competition. He had become famous before the competition. He was ranked among the 8 Heaven's Pride experts. However, nobody was optimistic about his victory before the competition had started. However, he has managed to reach this stage. This has undermined everyone's prediction. His next fight is with Emperor Chen. Can he be a match for Emperor Chen? I think it's difficult to say. He possesses incredible strength. His body is also extremely tyrannical. I've heard that he has also practiced a secret technique. So, his restoration ability is very quick. Emperor Chen may not be able to deal with him. He can't deal with Emperor Chen. Emperor Chen's spatial ability has made him almost invincible in this competition. Everyone was still in shock. Meanwhile, A figure had stormed into the microcosm. Everyone looked on as that fierce figure arrived inside the microcosm. It turned out to be Emperor Chun. He was seated upright above the golden lion and looked impressive. He was clad in an armor and held a lance in his hand. He seemed like the reincarnation of a god of war, and it seemed as if he was showing his contempt for the entire world. He was staring at Yi Shiwen with his ice-cold eyes. His lance was making a buzzing sound. It seemed as if it was eager to drink fresh blood. He was motionless, but he was releasing ice-cold aura in the surroundings. This would make one feel as if one had fallen into an ice hole. His mount, that golden lion, was moving and roaring even more restlessly. Even Emperor Chun's roar was quite scary. Emperor Chun, what does he want to do? Does he want to interfere with the competition? Someone asked. Isn't he afraid of receiving the joint punishment from all the four forces? Someone was left baffled, and had seemingly raised the question in anger. Insane. He's insane. What does he wish to achieve by intervening like this? Does he want to take the advantage of Yi Shiwen's present situation and kill him because he might be exhausted since his battle has ended a moment ago? Someone asked in fear. It's impossible. Emperor Chun is mistaken if he thinks so. Yi Shiwen has indeed killed two Heaven's Pride experts. However, the Xian Yuan twin stars didn't reveal their entire strength. In fact, Yi Shiwen hasn't been affected greatly. He's not exhausted. His vitality is still surging. He has maintained his peak state. Emperor Chun may think that he can get an opportunity to kill Yi Shiwen, but that's impossible. Then, why has Emperor Chun burst into the microcosm and disturbed the competition? The four forces must stop him. A disciple said, certain rules have been established by the four forces as far as this competition was concerned. And these established rules were absolute. People could mess around and cause chaos if there were no rules. However, nobody was allowed to act recklessly once their rules had been established. Even the lords of the major forces could at most use their voice to interfere if they wanted to intervene. But they couldn't dare to contend against the rules. Yi Shiwen, do you dare to fight? Emperor Chun cast a glance at Yi Shiwen and challenged him. He looked at him disdainfully. I know that these two trashes didn't cause you much trouble. So, you can fight right now. Of course, you can also choose to take rest if you're afraid. We will fight later in that case. A callous smile flashed through the corner of Emperor Chun's mouth as he looked at Yi Shiwen in a cold manner. It seemed as if he was certain that Yi Shiwen would agree to a fight at the moment. The spectators held their breath. Emperor Chun was extremely audacious. He had actually burst into the microcosm and had challenged Yi Shiwen for the fight. This was purely against the rules of this martial arts competition. The final fight for the championship had been set to take place on the final day. That day had been reserved for the finale. However, Emperor Chun wanted this fight to take place ahead of time. His actions had left everyone extremely surprised. It seemed as if these so-called rules didn't mean anything to him. He was using the goading method to indirectly force Yi Shiwen into a fight at this moment. However, the importance he was giving to Yi Shiwen was evident. He would never give so much importance to most people. Moreover, these two individuals were very special. Everyone had come to realize that these two had concealed their skills through the course of various fights. Nobody knew about the bottom line of their power because no one had been able to compel them to unleash their full strength so far. Moreover, they had effortlessly defeated the other Heaven's Pride experts as well. In fact, most people had also given up the idea of thinking too much about it. The fight between these two individuals was the biggest suspense of this martial arts competition, and everyone was still doubtful about the victor of the championship. The Supreme Lord of the True Martial University frowned as he saw this from the tall platform. He didn't like how Emperor Chun had broken the rule on a whim. He was about to berate him. However, he heard the voice of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall's lord before he could. The man spoke up in a mystifying manner. This young man is very courageous. I think that rules don't fit into the situation sometimes. The two of them will fight tomorrow anyway. It would be better if they fight right now and finish this competition. Everyone would finally get to see who is better among them that way. The Lord of the Muddy Sky Island looked at Xian Yuan Palace Hall's lord. He knew what his counterpart's intention was. The Xian Yuan Palace Hall's lord wanted both sides to engage in an utterly devastating struggle. It would be better if none of them would win. Then, both of them would forge a mortal enmity. And that would be the best outcome for the Xian Yuan Palace Hall's lord. The participants of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall had already died. So, he had nothing to do with this. Hence, it would be best for him if a deadly battle could erupt between these two. His intention obviously wasn't good. However, this matter involved a disciple of the Muddy Sky Island. So, he couldn't say much in this matter. After all, this rule of the martial arts competition had been made by the ancestors of these four forces. It had a very long history. Even these lords couldn't dare to break this rule. One must know that this competition would carry on for many times. It wasn't merely limited to this times. Other people could also randomly break the rules in the future if they would allow someone to break this rule here. And that would expose their own disciples to death traps in the future. They would suffer more loss than gains if this happened at this moment. Such rules meant nothing for people of their stature. In fact, these rules were less valuable than toilet paper to them. The key point was whether these rules were required or not. But it was evident that these major forces required such rules to protect their disciples. These rules would allow their disciples to compete and grow in a fair environment. The casualties of their disciples would increase if they messed up these rules. In fact, it could reach to such an extent that they wouldn't be able to bear the end result. This competition was mainly used to weaken each other's strength and to kill the other's immature Heaven's Pride level experts in their cribs. However, some extremely powerful contender had killed several Heaven's Pride experts on many occasions, and they've had to suffer huge losses as a result. So, the four forces had learned from their mistakes and had decided not to send all of their Heaven's Pride experts into the competition. And even the main objective of this competition had changed from strangling each other's geniuses to tempering one's own disciples. And that would also allow their disciples to mature more quickly. The arrangement of this level of competition at the appropriate time allowed the young experts to gain high-level battle experience, and that was something that they often couldn't on normal days. This was also the reason why many people would make breakthroughs right after the competition ended. They simply wanted to hone the skills of their disciples. They could accept the casualties to a certain extent. However, they couldn't bear large-scale damage. The Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave opened his mouth and spoke. I think that both of these individuals are pretty good. They are both full of vitality. However, that has nothing to do with shifting the fight to an earlier time. As for Emperor Chen's misconduct, I would like to say that the Muddy Sky Island must teach him a good lesson after he goes back home when the competition comes to an end. And I believe that the Muddy Sky Island wouldn't be swayed by personal affection towards him. Damn it, the talented barbaric person who seems uneducated and uncouthly from the outside is actually turned out to be the most sinister one. His belly is full of schemes and crafty plots. The other three lords silently cuss it in the secrecy of their hearts. To be continued. Chapter 457. Chapter 457. Fight until the world collapses. The Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave seemed impartial this time. However, his biased attitude in favor of Emperor Chun was almost clearly visible. It seemed as if this old guy still secretly held a grudge towards Yi Shiwen for killing Qi Tian. So, he wanted to cause trouble for Yi Shiwen. Perhaps there was an even deeper reason. Maybe he wanted both of them to lose. One must know that these two individuals possessed excessively tyrannical strength. They could easily defeat the Heaven's Pride experts of the same generation. And this was too scary. It didn't matter who among these two individuals would win this competition. But the said victor would become the biggest threat for the younger generation of the other forces. Therefore, it would be best if they were to mutually wound or kill each other. The lords of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall and the Fire Cloud Cave obviously wanted this scenario to take place. The Lord of the Muddy Sky Island heard the words of the Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave. However, he didn't say anything, and that was rather unexpected. Perhaps these two lords had made such remarks out of good intentions. However, he also knew that these two lords didn't genuinely harbor any good intentions. In fact, they weren't nice people to begin with. But this decision was biased in favor of Emperor Qin nonetheless. Emperor Qin and Yi Shiwen had just fought their battles a few moments ago, but there was a difference of heaven and earth between their respective opponents. Emperor Qin's opponent was merely a quasi-heaven's pride expert. However, Yi Shiwen had faced two top heaven's pride experts. The results were same, and both of them had effortlessly defeated their opponents in no time. But Emperor Qin was the one to face the resentment of the public. After all, that quasi-heaven's pride expert of the true martial university couldn't possibly be compared with the Xian Yuan twin stars. However, he didn't feel grateful towards the other's two lords. His heart was already assured that Emperor Qin stood at the invincible position since he possessed the spatial ability. Moreover, Emperor Qin possessed tyrannical strength. In fact, his strength was beyond everyone's imagination. Therefore, he was expected to win smoothly. Even the incredible strength of Yi Shiwen would end up being useless in this case. In fact, it would be pointless since he couldn't even land an attack on Emperor Qin. He could only get thrashed by Emperor Qin and would lose sooner or later. There wasn't any suspense attached to this battle. So, letting it take place at an earlier time would change nothing. Therefore, there was no need to treat it as a favor. The Supreme Lord of the true martial university spoke up at this time. Let's see what he chooses. This choice must be put in the hands of Yi Shiwen. Emperor Qin's strength would also be useless if Yi Shiwen didn't agree to fight at this time. After all, he couldn't possibly contend against those extremely tyrannical great sage experts, could he? They would crush him to death within no time. Even his spatial ability wouldn't be of any use against them. They were skilled enough to rush over and kill him before he would get a chance to teleport away. Emperor Qin was coldly looking at Yi Shiwen. He looked arrogant and despotic. His monstrous aura had surged up significantly. It seemed as if he would attack Yi Shiwen and kill him right now. However, Yi Shiwen knew that Emperor Qin wouldn't dare to attack him. He would have to face the consequence if he attacked. The Supreme Lord would crush him into pieces. This was the ground reality. Yi Shiwen, do you dare to fight? Emperor Qin shouted solemnly. He was seated upright atop his mount in midair. He looked like a huge mountain and was giving off an enormous suppression force. I will buy you a ride to hell since you're in such a hurry to die. Yi Shiwen replied coldly. His fight with the Xian Yuan twin stars hadn't affected him in any way. He might have been under a big threat if they had collaborated. However, he had made the first strike and had gained an upper hand in the fight. He didn't even give them a chance to collaborate. He obviously got very less time to pull it off. However, he made good use of the available time and caught them off guard. And he managed to kill both of them as a result. Moreover, he also possessed the Phoenix regeneration technique. So, he didn't need to be afraid of successive fights. Emperor Qin was gravely mistaken if he thought that Yi Shiwen must be exhausted because of his previous battle, and that he could take advantage of it. In fact, that would be his doom. It didn't matter to Emperor Qin whether the fight would be preponed by a day or postponed by another. It was all the same to him. This fight had to take place sooner or later. However, he wanted this battle to take place as soon as possible so that he could settle the scores without any further delay. We can finally settle the grudges from our time on the Demon Island properly, Yi Shiwen solemnly added. What? Yi Shiwen agreed to fight with Emperor Qin? How's this possible? Isn't he afraid of losing because of exhaustion? Someone asked in disbelief. Yi Shiwen wanted to fight in this situation. There was no difference between this and deliberately getting one's head caught between doors as far as most people were concerned. Moreover, it seems that both these individuals have some past grudges. Demon Island, where is this place? Why does it sound familiar? Someone asked in a doubtful manner. I know about Demon Island. It's an island that opens once in every 50 years. And many young elites of the 10 countries of the Southeast region are summoned to this island. A disciple of the true martial university explained. He had heard the legends of the Demon Island. So it's that Demon Island. I think it's a very strange place. It's said that many top experts of the younger generation have also stemmed from the Demon Island. However, The Demon Island Bell only summons the strongest geniuses of the Southeast region. Many people had deliberately rushed there even though they hadn't been summoned. And many of those experts located this strange place. There were several great sage experts among them too. However, they never returned from there. I didn't expect that these two individuals have already met each other on that Demon Island. So, both of them belong to Southeast region, that small region. Haha, it's ridiculous. Most outstanding disciples of the top forces of the southern region have come from the Southeast region. Many disciples had started to discuss about the Demon Island. Demon Island had a sinister reputation. It was even famous among the four forces. Many people had started to wonder that these two must have visited the Demon Island. So, they must have obtained some amazing treasures from there. After all, the Demon Island once used to be the burial place for gods according to the legends. Even Emperor Qin's mount, that golden lion, had come from the Demon Island. Yi Shiwen was lean and skinny. However, he looked like the very incarnation of an ancient god at the moment. His golden divinities crawled over his entire body, and it seemed as if he was clad in a golden divine robe. The golden divinities condensed and surged forth as gigantic sea waves. These golden waves then smashed against the surrounding space and shattered it. Not bad. You're genuinely courageous. Emperor Chun sneered as he looked at Yi Shiwen. He knew that Yi Shiwen would accept his challenge. It was impossible that he wouldn't agree to fight. Yi Shiwen wasn't the kind of person who would refuse to fight. Emperor Chun had to admit that Yi Shiwen was like him, at least to some extent. Both of them were extremely rigid individuals. They would prefer to die, but they wouldn't bow their heads down. Both of them were extremely arrogant and despotic in other people's opinion. They would do everything on a whim. However, the only difference was that Emperor Chen looked arrogant and despotic from outside, while Yi Shiwen looked elegant and graceful. In fact, Yi Shiwen was a kind-hearted person on the inside, but people couldn't see his kindness from outside. However, he would reveal his despotic character if someone tried to provoke him. Who do you think you are? You think that you're invincible because you possess the spatial ability? Yi Shiwen coldly sneered and spoke, and, by the way, you're too inquisitive about other people's business. Who doesn't know why you've arrived so late to challenge? Isn't it because you couldn't defeat your opponent earlier? Yi Shiwen secretly mocked Emperor Chun and hinted at what had happened during their last meeting. Emperor Chun had wanted to save the 8th prince at that time, but he had been too late to save him from Yi Shiwen. Emperor Chun was well aware of what Yi Shiwen was hinting at. However, he didn't wish to argue with him on this matter. So, he merely replied in a cold tone, "Your sharp tongue can't save your life. You can't handle my suppression," Emperor Chen added. An exceptionally murderous aura surged out from his body, and his golden lion suddenly charged towards Yi Shiwen. The golden lion's speed was extremely fast. It nearly drew a trail of golden after-images in midair, and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen within the blink of an eye. Incomparable speed shook the entire earth along with an endless amount of scary aura, and the energy waves swept out in all directions. Even the void got shattered as a result. It was an extremely frightening spectacle. Only strength will decide who will suppress whom. Yi Shiwen wasn't afraid of Emperor Chen. He rushed towards him. In fact, he seemed like an endless mountain of energy rolling over to crush Emperor Chen. Yi Shiwen summoned a Han seal at this moment. A huge mountain formed in the sky and swept down. Rumble. That mountain then smashed down at Emperor Chen's side. Emperor Chen let out a loud sonic boom, and the sonic waves crushed that huge mountain into fine powder. Yi Shiwen's pupils suddenly contracted. His face exposed a bit of solemn expression. His Han seal was the first form of the overturning the heaven seal. It was just the first type, but it still carried endless might. Emperor Chen's had shattered Yi Shiwen's Han seal with a loud shout. Something like this had happened for the first time. Emperor Chen was extremely tyrannical. In fact, he was nearly beyond his imagination. And this was the main reason why he considered Emperor Chen to be his biggest enemy in the younger generation. He had obviously given the most attention to Emperor Chen in this competition. That was because Emperor Chen posed a huge threat to him, Rumble. Both of them ferociously collided. It seemed as if two tyrannical and invincible gods had suddenly knocked against each other in the sky. The sky got shattered in an instant, and this collision set off energy waves which severed the surrounding space. It looked like the doomsday was upon. Both of them attacked each other once again, and, without any hesitation, Yi Shiwen was fighting two enemies at one time, since he was clashing with Emperor Chen and that Golden Lion at this time. The Golden Lion was merely a mount. However, its strength wasn't less than that of those top-level Heaven's Pride experts. So, it was extremely difficult to deal with. However, Yi Shiwen didn't fall into a disadvantageous situation while he faced them. Thanks to that, he had immediately earned himself a whole new level of respect in the eyes of many people. After all, most people felt that it would be very difficult for Yi Shiwen to win this match. Emperor Chen possessed the spatial ability, and he was almost stationed at the invincible position. Moreover, Emperor Chen and his mount were equal to two top-tier Heaven's Pride experts, and they were far more tyrannical as a team than the Xian Yuan twin stars. They were fighting at a lightning-fast speed and only left trails of afterimages behind them. They had already exchanged 1,000 strokes within a short time. Tyrannical shock waves overflowed in all directions as a result. Layer after layer of energy storms swept out. This scene was extremely tyrannical and could scare a person to death. Bang! Suddenly, an explosion occurred while they were engaged in this fast-paced battle. The microcosm couldn't withstand the intensity of their battle and shattered into pieces. To be continued. Chapter 458. Bang! The aftermath of the fight between these two individuals was too frightening. The entire microcosm had collapsed. The space has the ability to restore automatically. Many legendary level experts could also rip the space apart. However, the torn space would automatically restore itself the very next second. It was impossible for them to damage it to such an extent that it couldn't self-recover. Not to mention, the bigger the world, the harder it is to destroy it. This was merely a microcosm, but these two had exploded it into small pieces. The fight between Yi Shiwen and Emperor Chen had reached a terrifying extent. Both of them possessed extremely tyrannical strength. Those two came out of the collapsing microcosm and landed in an arena that was located on top of the metropolis Marshall Peak. Rumble! The terrifying explosion set off a series of storms. The impact made a huge crater on that stage, even though it was made of strong jade. Everyone was dumbstruck when they saw this scene. They hadn't anticipated that the fight between these two individuals would be so incredible. The Xian Yuan twin stars brothers had also broken the microcosm. However, they hadn't been able to shatter it in its entirety. The microcosm had restored itself soon enough in that case. However, these two individuals had shattered the microcosm into pieces. This microcosm was less than 100 kilometers in range. However, it was still a world in its own. It wasn't that big, and was only like a fragment of a world. But this microcosm had been shattered so thoroughly that it had failed to restore itself. Everyone was left in awe because of this. It could be said that they had nearly been scared to death. The experts of the younger generation had especially become even more frightened and apprehensive. After all, these experts and these two individuals belonged to the same generation. Therefore, they were very concerned about the strength of these two individuals. In fact, they had a premonition that the winner of this fight would mark the beginning of a new era. And these disciples might have to live under the shadow of the winner of this battle for a very long time. They secretly compared themselves with these two individuals. However, they realized that they wouldn't stand a chance if they were to exchange places with any one of these two. These two reached to the top of the public square of the metropolis Marshall Peak while fighting. The space on top of the metropolis Marshall Peak had been strengthened. Therefore, it was quite difficult for them to break open the space even if they would attack with the entirety of their strength. In fact, only small cracks would appear even if they succeeded in breaking the space. However, the attacks of both of these individuals had still reached an intense and marvelous degree. None of the two was holding back one bit. This is not fair. a disciple of Muddy Sky Island, yelled. The space above this metropolis Marshall Peak is restricted, so it's not that easy to shuttle back and forth in this space. It has imposed an enormous restriction on Emperor Chen's spatial ability. He had barely made this remark when the disciples of the true Marshall University suddenly looked at him bitterly. Damn it, this bastard is too shameless. Emperor Chen possesses spatial ability. Is that any fair? Then, how's this unfair? He's talking such nonsense. Die! Emperor Chen roared, and the released sonic boom dissipated in all directions. His aura condensed into a pillar of energy. It then soared into the sky as it reached an extremely dreadful point. His golden lion let out a long and loud roar. It brandished its sharp claws and grabbed the air surrounding itself. An explosion occurred, and a vacuum region was consequently formed. The golden lion moved in a flash. It then suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen to attack. Yi Shiwen's eyes flashed as soon as he realized that the movement of the golden lion had been much slower this time than it had been a moment ago. It hadn't used its instant teleportation ability a moment ago, but there was no doubt that it had used a certain portion of its spatial ability. Its speed had reached a terrifying level, thanks to its natural affinity for space. It was as fast as the lightning. Therefore, it was impossible for an average person to respond because the golden lion was moving too fast. Fortunately, it was Yi Shiwen, and he was able to react in time. Whoosh! Suddenly, a pair of golden wings stretched open behind Yi Shiwen. What kind of wings were these? They had spread far and wide, and had blotted out the sky like golden clouds. Everyone was stunned when they saw this scene. In fact, most people's first reaction was, Yi Shiwen is a devil. It was impossible for someone to bring out such terrifying wings. Only the devil race could do this. Many human experts could fly, but flying was one thing, and using wings to fly was another. However, several people also noticed it was some kind of magical power. This pair of wings wasn't made of flesh. Rather, it was made up of energy. Moreover, this energy was rather intrepid and could scare a person to death. What kind of magical ability is this? How can it be so frightening? These wings were sweeping out waves of golden divinities each time they flapped. And those golden waves blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they swept across. Moreover, wind and thunder erupted every time these huge wings flapped. It was like a precursor of a rainstorm's arrival. Yi Shiwen had already practiced his devil wings to an extremely profound level. Moreover, he had also touched upon the principle of flight since he had entered the semi-sage realm. An ordinary legendary expert couldn't contend against a semi-sage expert. It was impossible. Yi Shiwen looked like a devil god at this time. His devil wings were fluttering, and it seemed as if the clouds were thundering and were letting him stay afloat in the sky. Flap, an enormous lightning fell from the sky, and it compelled Emperor Chun and his golden lion to retreat. Crash bang! Yi Shiwen's devil wings were flapping unceasingly and were sweeping out wind and thunder. Then, the lightning began to seethe within this tempest. It then began to revolve around Yi Shiwen. Soon, it seemed as if he was standing in an ocean of lightning. Emperor Chen's complexion had turned gloomy. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen could be so tyrannical. The battle had become increasingly intense, and Yi Shiwen had gradually started to reveal his hidden abilities. But Emperor Chen hadn't anticipated this scenario earlier. Perhaps he had never thought that Yi Shiwen could be such a tough opponent. In fact, his mind still had the image of the Yi Shiwen he had met on the Demon Island. He would have already fought with Yi Shiwen, and would have already killed him if Qing Su hadn't interfered. He didn't feel anything different at the beginning of the competition. He wasn't afraid, even though Yi Shiwen had progressed rather quickly. He believed that he was the strongest. After all, he had the spatial ability. In fact, who would come forward to say that they were at the first if Emperor Chun were to say that he himself was at the second rank? He didn't possess the spatial ability himself. His golden lion did. However, what difference would it make? They had always been a team. Sure enough, everyone had suddenly become optimistic about him after he had displayed the spatial ability. The Xian Yuan twin stars were everyone's favorites for winning this competition at first. However, that had changed after his rise. In fact, they had become totally unworthy of a mention. However, he hadn't felt a shred of pride at this. This was inevitable in his opinion. This was a matter of fact. In fact, the Xian Yuan twin stars brothers were two pieces of trash in his opinion. He merely thought of Yi Shiwen as a scourge that he hadn't been to get rid of earlier. He genuinely never considered Yi Shiwen his rival. And this had been his thought process until now. However, his thinking changed after he saw Yi Shiwen's current avatar and found out how dreadful he truly was. It was entirely different from the image of Yi Shiwen he had in his mind from back then. He had no choice but to force himself to not get nervous so that he could respond calmly. Flap! 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 Yi Shiwen's huge golden wings were fluttering crazily. Wind and thunder were sweeping across like a rampaging dragon. It seemed as if a rainstorm was about to arrive. Endless thunderstorms gathered and began to pour down towards Emperor Chun from above, just like raindrops. Bang! The wind and thunder pounded on that golden lion. It struck on its body and charred a portion it. The golden lion didn't sustain serious injuries as a result of this attack. However, the force of the lightning had left its body a bit numb. It became sluggish for a short moment as a result of this. However, that short moment was enough for Yi Shiwen. The wind and thunder were present everywhere in the sky, and they suddenly pounded on the golden lion upon Yi Shiwen's command. Bang! 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 An endless rain of heavenly thunders poured upon the bodies of the golden lion and Emperor Chun, and the impact thereof had left them in a difficult situation. To be continued. Chapter 459. These wind and thunderstorms had arrived in a huge quantity. They weren't too powerful. However, the quantity was extremely huge. In fact, they seemed like a torrential downpour. The golden lion's speed was very high. It appeared like a golden lightning as it moved. However, the problem was that the scope of Yi Shiwen's stretched devil wings was too broad. In fact, they were like two huge golden clouds. Emperor Chun and the golden lion were unable to get out of its range in such a short period of time as a result. So, they were forced in a somewhat difficult situation. They didn't sustain severe injuries. However, this had left them extremely depressed. Suddenly, two golden lights flashed. Yi Shiwen finally opened his eyes. Then a loud and sharp piercing schwa sound reverberated out of the blue, and he moved into action. And he disappeared in front of everyone's sight as a result. People suddenly lost sight of Yi Shiwen as soon as this scene blossomed before their eyes. They had to condense their real elemental energy in their eyes to enhance their vision. However, they were barely able to see his afterimage. Even then, bang! Yi Shiwen pressed down his palm. It pounded upon Emperor Chun, but it seemed as if a mountain was smashing down from the sky. Rumble! Emperor Chun's movement wasn't slow either. In fact, he was even quicker than the golden lion. He promptly turned around and shot his lance upward to face the incoming attack. Bang! Yi Shiwen's palm and Emperor Chun's lance collided. The sound of the collision of metal sounded. Everyone was so scared upon witnessing this scene that they almost fell down from their seats. Everyone knew that Emperor Chun's lance was a sage tool. In fact, it was strong to pierce the void. It was exceptionally terrifying. It could even stab a sage expert to death. However, a sound of collision between iron and gold had resounded when it collided with Yi Shiwen's palm. This indicated that Yi Shiwen's body was intrepid to the point of exaggeration. He had failed to break this lance into pieces, but his flesh had still managed to counterbalance the incredible might of this sage tool. Such kind of a body was intrepid beyond any limits. He possessed such kind of a body. How could anybody be his opponent? Speed, strength, and physical toughness. He had perfected these attributes to the peak. It was sufficient to place him at the top among his peers. After all, Emperor Chun was ranked at the top because of his spatial ability. Moreover, Everyone had also witnessed Yi Shiwen's incredible speed. They could only see his figure on occasions, even though they had enhanced their visions. Moreover, his physical toughness was so tyrannical that it had left them stunned. After all, his body could be compared with a sage tool. He had clashed head-on with a sage tool. Such bodily strength had left everyone in awe. Moreover, it was of pivotal importance to note that he also possessed insane strength. His attack had barely touched Emperor Qin's body, but the man's arm was still left to tremble from the shock. It was evident that this attack had left a decent effect on him. It could be said that Yi Shiwen's slap would have broken all the bones in the body of an average person, and would have left the said person unable to stand up. Many people realized that Emperor Qin's body was also extremely tyrannical. They hadn't realized it earlier. They were only attracted to his spatial ability before. His spatial ability had obscured everything else. However, one couldn't blame the others since he himself was dazzled by this spatial ability alone. He felt that many of his own characteristics and skills had become insignificant in front of this spatial ability. Everyone else seemed to think so as well. It wasn't that they thought that he didn't possess any other skill. However, his spatial ability was too amazing. However, his collision with Yi Shiwen had made them realize that his body was also extremely tyrannical. One must keep in mind that Yi Shiwen had defeated the barbarian god's real body, Qi Tian, at a lightning speed. This fight had confused them even more. After all, both of the individuals were insanely powerful. What kind of magical power is this? An extreme greedy look flashed in the eyes of the lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall when he saw Yi Shiwen's huge wings. His high cultivation level had allowed him to read Yi Shiwen's movements rather clearly. He had surpassed the great sage realm. So, ordinary magical powers and martial art techniques were unlikely to attract his attention. However, Yi Shiwen's devil wings had made him excited. He could tell that Yi Shiwen's magical power was truly outstanding. In fact, it had increased Yi Shiwen's speed to such a terrifying extent that many sage experts couldn't match his current speed. Fortunately, his opponent was a tyrannical expert like Emperor Qin. He also possessed extremely fast speed. Otherwise, it would have been a child's play for Yi Shiwen to kill an ordinary person at his current speed. Therefore, this lord's speed would also advance by leaps and bounds if he could get hold of this magical power. Even his strength would increase enormously if that were to happen. The Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave was keeping a close eye on Yi Shiwen's body. Several people had been stunned when they had seen how Yi Shiwen had tackled the sage tool. Even an expert like him was no exception, despite the fact that he had surpassed the great sage realm. And that's because he had come to realize that Yi Shiwen's body was probably more tyrannical than the barbarian god's real body. Moreover, it wasn't a question of the disparity in martial power. He knew that one couldn't possibly clash with a sage tool while still being at semi-sage realm. In fact, even the most frightening barbarian god's real body couldn't achieve this feat. Someone had once tried to break a sage tool with bare hands after they had become a sage expert. However, that had happened a long time ago. He had always taken that to be a mere legend. However, he had come to realize that there's always someone out there who's better. Similarly, Yi Shiwen's cultivated body was probably more tyrannical than the barbarian god's real body. He got very excited as he realized this. One must know that these southern barbarian forces had risen to influence by relying on their strong physiques. And the possession of such an extremely powerful body meant that Yi Shiwen must also possess some kind of a secret body technique. And this had attracted his attention far more than the devil wings ever could. He might rise above all others in the ensuing war among southern barbarian forces if he could obtain such a body. One needed to pay a huge price to cultivate the barbarian god's real body. Moreover, one would also require the flaming sun real water. But it seemed like Yi Shiwen must have faced far lesser difficulties. After all, it was evident that Yi Shiwen had cultivated his body to such an extent on his own. And that trace of astonishment on the face of the Supreme Lord of the true martial university had made this fact overly obvious. This meant that even he didn't know anything about Yi Shiwen's physique. Therefore, Yi Shiwen must have cultivated this physique on his own. Yi Shiwen had cultivated such a physique alone. So, this lord would be able to nurture several people with physiques like Yi Shiwen's if he were to put the entire resources of the Fire Cloud Cave into cultivating physiques. And that would easily make up for the loss of Qi Tian's talent. Both these individuals had revealed their hidden abilities in this fight. For example, Emperor Qin's tyrannical body had unexpectedly got exposed. In addition, Yi Shiwen had never revealed such incredible speed and astonishing magical abilities in the past. Even the people of their own sex didn't know that they possessed such abilities. It's instinctual for people to keep their secret abilities hidden until they are forced to reveal. Their opponents hadn't been able to compel them to display their full potential so far. Perhaps it could be said that they didn't feel the need to use their hidden powers. However, they had unleashed their powers without any hesitation in the face of tyrannical experts like each other. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen was extremely fast. He appeared like a golden flash to the eyes of the spectators. In fact, his speed would increase beyond unimaginable proportions whenever he'd flap his huge wings. He continued to attack Emperor Qin in order to kill him. It seemed as if every palm attack of his could break the heavens. Emperor Qin didn't get the time to breathe in the face of Yi Shiwen's quick and heavy attacks. In fact, it could be said that he had become tired of running for his life to no end. It wasn't that Emperor Qin wasn't enough tyrannical. Rather, Yi Shiwen was far too powerful. Everyone felt that everything about Yi Shiwen had become tyrannical to an astonishing level, whether it was his strength, speed, or physical toughness. He could kill a Heaven's Pride expert in one slap with such tyrannical body. He wouldn't even need to use his real elemental energy for that. Yi Shiwen's speed had reached the extreme after he had launched the Devil Wings. In fact, the speed of lightning wasn't enough to describe his current speed. An average person couldn't even see him. In fact, even Emperor Qin could barely see him. He could somehow keep up, but that too with great difficulty. Emperor Qin was able to react. However, he couldn't match Yi Shiwen's speed. Therefore, he had no option but to watch as Yi Shiwen assumed complete the control. He had no way to counter Yi Shiwen's attacks. His body wasn't strong enough to contend against Yi Shiwen head-on. It was only strong enough to prevent itself from getting smashed in a moment's time. The spectators with discerning eyes could see that Yi Shiwen would kill Emperor Qin if the fight continued like this. Yi Shiwen is extremely ferocious. Who could have thought that he would possess such abilities? Whether it's speed, strength, or body, it seems that he has grasped all the magical power techniques. And these techniques are extremely difficult to understand in reality. How can he be so ferocious? How many adventures has he been on? Yeah, even I was very optimistic about Emperor Qin earlier. After all, he possesses the spatial ability. However, I didn't expect that things would turn out like this. Yi Shiwen has completely suppressed him under his attacks. Emperor Qin is no match for him. Such strength was extremely tyrannical. It was too scary. Many believe that Emperor Qin's strength was also extremely tyrannical and had no limits. In fact, his body and speed were both high-handed. Qin Wang didn't have any power to fight back when he had faced the repeated offensives, and he had gotten killed in the end. Therefore, Emperor Qin could be ranked at the top of the younger generation. However, such an expert had been suppressed by Yi Shiwen. In fact, the man didn't even have the power to fight back. That's quite normal. Emperor Qin possesses tyrannical strength. However, he was mainly depending on his spatial ability, and that's the reason why he hadn't revealed his true strength in the past. It doesn't matter how tyrannical Yi Shiwen is, he wouldn't have been able to match Emperor Qin's speed if Emperor Qin had revealed his spatial ability inside the microcosm. In fact, Emperor Qin wouldn't have been the one getting suppressed at this moment if that had come to happen. Rather, Yi Shiwen would have been the one getting suppressed, and Yi Shiwen's tyrannical strength would have been of no use if that scenario had unfolded. Damn it! How can this Yi Shiwen be so lucky? This is simply despicable. Yi Shiwen would have been like a feather in front of Emperor Qin's spatial ability if the space of the metropolis Marshall Peak wasn't so strongly strengthened. A disciple of Muddy Sky Island complained in a rather unreconciled manner. To be continued. Chapter 460. The disciples of the other forces became somewhat speechless. They looked at this disciple of the Muddy Sky Island. Emperor Qin's superiority wasn't enough for him because the environment had suddenly become unfavorable for him. The situation was the same for the both of them. Emperor Qin had been restricted. However, it wasn't as if Yi Shiwen hadn't been restricted. He too couldn't attack extravagantly. However, everyone had no choice but to admit that this situation was too advantageous for Yi Shiwen. The restrictions had been imposed on both of them. But Emperor Qin's spatial ability had been restricted. There was also a restriction on Yi Shiwen, but it wasn't very evident. This hadn't been seen as that overwhelming of a change in the beginning. However, nobody had anticipated that Yi Shiwen would possess such terrifying magical power, and that his speed would increase to the pinnacle. And that too at a time when Emperor Qin's speed had been restricted to a great degree. Yi Shiwen's speed had increased significantly. Therefore, the restrictions of this space had turned out to be a good thing for Yi Shiwen. Lucky? Is this merely just good luck? A true Marshall University's disciple spoke up with disdain. Didn't you pay attention to Yi Shiwen's wisdom in battle? He didn't give the Twin Stars brothers any chance to collaborate when he had fought them. And he eventually stunned everyone by killing them quickly. Therefore, the contest, which was supposed to be a bitter struggle, transformed into a one-sided battle. And he has shattered the microcosm this time. Is it a case of Yi Shiwen's good luck or Emperor Qin's bad luck? Is it that simple? Can it be possible that Yi Shiwen might have planned to drag him to the metropolis Marshall Peak for the real fight? This true Marshall University disciple had spoken of another possibility. Everyone held their breath as they heard this. Yi Shiwen's planning ability had transcended everyone's imagination if this disciple was correct. He had thought of a good way to deal with the adverse situation in the midst of this fast-paced battle. He had transformed an unfavorable situation into a favorable one as a result. And he would be considered dreadful if he had pre-planned this. Who could match such battle wisdom? Of course, they didn't know that the restricted space had also affected Yi Shiwen. The principle of flight employed by his devil wings was very different from that of a bird's principle of flight. He must manipulate the principle of flight, but he must also do the same with the principle of space. The principle of space was also a very important part. He couldn't possibly maneuver around at such speeds in the air without manipulating the principle of space. The restriction on the spatial ability had turned out to be a big disaster for Emperor Qin. However, it didn't cause a small effect on Yi Shiwen either. Yi Shiwen had planned to go all out while he'd compete against Emperor Qin. The opposite party could teleport away in a flash, but Yi Shiwen had his plans to deal with him. However, it suddenly seemed as if his plans weren't needed. It had become a lot easier to surround and kill Emperor Qin in this scenario. He didn't care whether it was fair or unfair to Emperor Qin. He didn't think about these things. Only an idiot would think about fair and unfair things in the middle of a battle. A lot of things in this world were unfair. For example, Emperor Qin had challenged him to a fight without considering the fact that he had fought against the Twin Stars brother a moment ago. Emperor Qin had forced him to fight without caring about whether it was fair or unfair. So, he could go to hell if he wanted to complain about the unfairness of the situation. Yi Shiwen's eyes were only fixed on Emperor Qin at the moment. He wanted to kill Emperor Qin. He believed that Emperor Qin wouldn't have let go of a chance such as this to kill him. Inverting Ocean Seal. Yi Shiwen's shout gave rise to a sonic boom. Suddenly, endless water drops appeared in the sky behind Emperor Qin. The water droplets condensed into a vast ocean-like blue seal and pounded towards Emperor Qin. Bang! Emperor Qin didn't get the time to react. And this attack pounded on his body. His hands had already become numb after having fought for so long. They weren't as flexible as before. They had been rendered lifeless by the shocks caused by Yi Shiwen's attacks during the course of fight. Emperor Qin's armor got shattered into small pieces. This water-based attack had seemed feeble at first, but it had condensed to form an extremely mighty attack. It had broken his armor, and it had also badly injured his body. His flesh had been ruptured, and blood had started to splash out. His bones had also been exposed. In fact, he had nearly been crushed to death by Yi Shiwen. What? Emperor Chen has sustained injuries? Everyone was startled. Emperor Chen had been suppressed and forced into a disadvantageous position by Yi Shiwen. However, being suppressed and sustaining injuries were completely different things. He had merely been suppressed by Yi Shiwen until this moment. However, he still had enough strength to hold his own, but he had now sustained injuries. Such deep injuries indicated vulnerability and the beginning of an inevitable defeat. That's because these injuries would affect Emperor Chen's ability to react. The regeneration pace of Yi Shiwen's Phoenix regeneration technique was extremely fast. However, it still required some time to heal the injuries in moments of vulnerability times. Yi Shiwen would inevitably have his weak moments in the future. His Phoenix regeneration technique would certainly shorten his vulnerable moments to the minimum. However, that short period of time would be enough for some top-tier expert to give a decisive blow to him. However, Emperor Chen's secret healing technique wasn't as good as Yi Shiwen's. Therefore, this time period was enough for Yi Shiwen to gain an upper hand and give him a fatal blow. Emperor Chen, there is nothing left for you to say. It's time for your death. I will send you on your way to the afterlife. Yi Shiwen laughed and spoke. He couldn't help but laugh out loud when he saw that his biggest enemy was about to die at his hands. He had burst into laughter because of this strange and carefree feeling. In fact, he was dripping with delight. He suddenly had an illusion. He felt as if he was going to make a breakthrough. People are often unable to make breakthroughs. This isn't limited to the fact that the accumulation of energy isn't enough. Instead, it's mainly because of the shackles on their spirits. This is the so-called case of the dilemma of the person who has his will shattered by someone. And this shackles that person's spirit. These shackles are usually invisible, but they appear when the said person confronts that someone again. And these invisible shackles strongly bind the said person when that happens. Yi Shiwen had been afraid of Emperor Chen since that time on the Demon Island, and his spirit had been shackled by the invisible shackles of Emperor Chen ever since. Generally, it's quite difficult for people to perceive these shackles. However, it is extremely dangerous. It can even evolve into the inner demons within one's heart, and might also obstruct one's cultivation thereafter. However, such shackles were also good since having inner demons was considered a good thing, but only as long as one was capable of eradicating them in the future. One would then have a broad view of the world, but only as long as these shackles had been obliterated. They would get the same feeling that a blindfolded person gets when their blindfold is suddenly removed from over their eyes. Yi Shiwen perceived the same kind of feeling at this moment. His cultivation hadn't made a breakthrough for a long time, but he could faintly feel the signs of making a breakthrough at this moment. It was true that the quickest way to make a breakthrough was during a combat. Yi Shiwen was laughing loudly, but he had become even more cautious. The closer one reaches to victory, the more one needs to be cautious. He wouldn't wish to lose the upper hand and suffer an unexpected defeat in the end. Such experience would be too hard to bear. An inverting ocean seal condensed on top of Yi Shiwen's hand and swept down towards Emperor Chen and the Golden Lion. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it pounded upon them. It seemed as if this attack would kill Emperor Chen. Emperor Chen and the Golden Lion were sent flying by the attack. However, they also got the opportunity to get away from Yi Shiwen's attack range. They finally got the time to respite as a result. Roar! The Golden Lion roared loudly. It opened its mouth like a sacrificial bowl. A seemingly endless amount of energy fluctuated inside its mouth. It transformed into a huge golden beam of light and shot towards Yi Shiwen. Then it collided with the inverting ocean seal. Rumble! The collision emitted dazzling rays of light and formed a ball of energy that exploded into a giant mushroom cloud. This mushroom cloud then rose up from the place of the collision. This collision was like an atomic eruption and had crushed the surrounding ground into fine powder. That beam of light had gotten crushed between the ground and Yi Shiwen's inverting ocean seal, and had burst into golden rays of light that had filled the entire sky. However, the seal had continued to sweep down from above. Rumble, it pounded on the public square and smashed open a massive crater. The spectators couldn't help but gasp. The space on top of the metropolis Marshall Peak had been strengthened countless times. In other words, everything within the confines of this peak must have been strengthened several times. Moreover, that the public square was made up of solid jade stone. It had also been protected with top-tier barrier formations. However, Yi Shiwen's inverting ocean seal had opened a huge crater in it. The terrifying might of the inverting ocean seal was clearly visible. A person probably wouldn't survive this attack. Even if he were to have 9 lives to achieve this feat, the seal technique was absolutely dreadful. They had never seen such a terrifying seal technique. It seemed as if a god had imparted this technique. Everyone understood what kind of attack Emperor Chen had just faced. Even a top expert like him didn't have the power to fight back when faced with Yi Shiwen's attack, since he was battered and exhausted. So he didn't have any way out. It wasn't that Emperor Chen was too weak. Rather, Yi Shiwen was far too powerful. Whereas Emperor Chen, smoke and dust had scattered. Sharp-sighted people tried, but couldn't spot Emperor Chen. It seemed as if he had disappeared into thin air. Yi Shiwen's attack was very terrifying. However, it couldn't have annihilated Emperor Chen on an atomic level after having struck him. The remains of his body must have remained still. However, they couldn't see any trace of him at the moment. Even his golden lion had disappeared without a trace. Yi Shiwen felt that his attack hadn't actually hit Emperor Chen. In fact, he had clearly felt a spatial fluctuation, and had felt that Emperor Chen had teleported away. How's this possible? He can use his teleportation ability here as well? Yi Shiwen was kind of terrified in his heart. He didn't know how Emperor Chen had escaped. Had he been able to use his spatial ability even in this situation? However, Yi Shiwen had become even more vigilant because Emperor Chen might appear at any place if he could use his spatial ability here. And this was extremely dangerous for Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen condensed his real elemental energy in his eyes and opened his discernment vision. He was paying absolute attention to spot any fluctuations in the surrounding space. He had also swept out his divine sense. So, he was prepared to sense Emperor Chen's presence anywhere and anytime. Yi Shiwen, it's over now, an ice-cold and merciless voice resounded. To be continued. Chapter 461. Yi Shiwen, it's over now, an ice-cold voice said in a ruthless manner as a figure suddenly appeared behind Yi Shiwen. Emperor Chen was seated upright on the golden lion. His lance pierced the vast sky like a dragon. It issued a shrill, piercing sound as it swept towards Yi Shiwen's back, and it seemed as if it would pierce his heart. Emperor Chen's body didn't look in a miserable condition anymore. It was evident that his injuries had recovered in this short period of time. Yi Shiwen had never thought that he would accidentally obtain a secret technique, such as the Phoenix Regeneration Technique. Similarly, his opponent had also had his own share of adventures. So, he must also have obtained an extremely marvelous healing technique, even if it wasn't as good as the Phoenix Regeneration Technique. This was bad for Yi Shiwen in this situation, who would be able to kill Emperor Chen if he could go into hiding to heal his injuries. In fact, it wouldn't be incorrect to say that he was almost standing at the position of invincibility because of his spatial ability. He was very troublesome. The spatial ability was possessed by the Golden Lion, not him. However, what difference would it make? Yi Shiwen had racked his brain to come up with a strategy in order to drag Emperor Chen to the public square of the metropolis Marshall Peak. Wasn't it meant to restrict Emperor Chen's spatial ability? That's correct. The fact is that breaking the microcosm was also one of his strategies. Otherwise, Yi Shiwen would have been in an extremely disadvantageous situation in front of an opponent like Emperor Chen who possessed the spatial ability. Yi Shiwen could also shuttle back and forth in the space if his devil wings had been perfected to the top layer. However, That was a matter for the future. Yi Shiwen wanted to practice the devil wings to such an extent that he could break through the bindings of space at will. However, he still had to go a long way to achieve that. He didn't have any way to deal with Emperor Qin's spatial ability at the moment. Restricting Emperor Qin's spatial ability was very necessary for him, because this fight might turn into a bitter struggle if he couldn't do that. He was confident that Emperor Qin couldn't kill him. Therefore, it would become an extremely long confrontation if he couldn't kill Emperor Qin either. He didn't wish for this to happen. He believed that Emperor Qin must be thinking of killing him. So, why mustn't he try to kill Emperor Qin as well? Therefore, he must think of a method to kill Emperor Qin. Only then would he be at ease. Yi Shiwen had planned how he would face Emperor Qin before this unexpected fight had begun. He had never looked down on his opponent unlike Emperor Qin had. In fact, Yi Shiwen hadn't taken him lightly. Relatively speaking, he was more wary of Emperor Qin than Emperor Qin was of him. Emperor Qin had never looked him eye to eye before this battle. He had always looked down on Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen considered Emperor Qin as his biggest enemy in the present generation, and his valuation of Emperor Qin had increased further when Emperor Qin had revealed the spatial ability. Yi Shiwen had thought of many ways to restrict Emperor Qin's spatial ability. However, he couldn't find any concrete method. After all, he wasn't a great sage expert. The great sage experts could reinforce the surrounding space to stop the enemy from coming closer to them. So, Yi Shiwen eventually thought of a method and dragged Emperor Qin to the public square of the metropolis Marshall Peak. The conflagration of this battle had been brought down to the main world. Things would become extremely simple for Yi Shiwen if he could restrict Emperor Qin's spatial ability. Then, even the tyrannical Emperor Qin wouldn't be a match for him. Everything so far had happened as per his expectations. Emperor Qin had become like a crippled person. One could say that one of his arms had been broken since his spatial ability had been restricted. He could only resist Yi Shiwen's attacks as a result. However, he didn't have the power to fight back. And he wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen when it came to real strength. Yi Shiwen had condensed 1,000 Tao principles. Emperor Qin wasn't far behind him, but there was a difference of heaven and earth between their strengths. Yi Shiwen had reached perfection in the semi-sage realm. However, things that happened afterwards had gone beyond his expectation. Emperor Qin has appeared. Someone shouted in alarm. It seemed as if this person had already seen Yi Shiwen getting hit in advance, and blood had already splashed out of his body thereafter. Emperor Qin's sudden appearance, after having disappeared suddenly a while ago, had stunned everyone. He could travel back and forth in the space of the metropolis Marshall Peak. This ability was far too terrifying. Yi Shiwen is screwed. Nobody can be a match for our Emperor Qin since he has regained his spatial ability. Yi Shiwen is nothing more than a trash before him as matters stand. A Muddy Sky Island's disciple burst into laughter and spoke. They had become quite depressed when they had seen Yi Shiwen unceasingly suppress Emperor Qin. However, they suddenly burst into laughter as they saw Emperor Qin's counterattack. Clang, a loud sound of the collision of iron and gold metal resounded along with an explosion. But blood hadn't splashed out of Yi Shiwen's body as everyone had previously imagined. Rather, he had avoided danger at the most crucial moment with a sudden thrust of his palm. His palm transformed into a huge dragon claw and went up to face that sage-level lance. Rumble! The collision between the two sides had seemed like the collision between two megastars. It was the kind of clash that would leave both sides shattered. A huge explosion occurred along with the emission of boundless rays of light. Endless blast waves and energy storms swept out in all directions. Everything in a vast range had been annihilated by this blast. Even the air wasn't an exception to this. It was an extremely dreadful scene. Clank, suddenly, a sword's cry resounded. A huge long sword suddenly appeared in Yi Shiwen's hand. The absorbed energy soared in the sky. It swept across boundless divine beams and suddenly pounded towards Emperor Qin to chop him. Bang! This long sword cut apart that boundless storm and struck Emperor Qin. Poof! Blood splashed out from Emperor Qin's body, and rose 300 feet in the air. He snorted painfully and disappeared before everyone's eyes. Everyone had been holding their breath since the moment Emperor Chen had appeared, and they finally let out their breath when they saw Emperor Chen disappear again. The sounds of inhaling and exhaling resounded everywhere as a result. Everything had been said long ago. However, all this had happened in a flash. Everyone had held their breath the moment Emperor Chen had suddenly appeared. This was because they had anticipated that Emperor Chen would pierce Yi Shiwen's heart and insta-kill Yi Shiwen, just like he had done with Qin Wang. After all, Qin Wang's strength wasn't bad either. However, he had been defeated instantly. Emperor Chen hadn't spent a bit of his strength, but had managed to defeat him in a moment. And this had left a deep impression in everyone's heart. Therefore, everyone had thought that Yi Shiwen would be defeated as soon as Emperor Chen would demonstrate his spatial ability. Yi Shiwen had also showed tyrannical strength, but nobody was optimistic about him when it came to fighting with Emperor Chen. However, everybody realized that Yi Shiwen was too tyrannical once the real fight started. And his speed was extremely high. This fact was even more important. He obviously didn't have the means to prevent Emperor Chen's spatial ability. However, he was fast enough to ensure that he could retaliate before he got hit by Emperor Chen's surprise attacks. Yi Shiwen might not be able to land a fatal blow on him. However, this passive fighting style would also be quite effective. It turned out that Emperor Chen had sustained injuries as a result of this attack. Everyone was dumbstruck. They didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would injure Emperor Chen even though he had revealed the spatial ability. This outcome is beyond everyone's imagination. Who would have guessed that this would come to happen? Someone exclaimed, "Yeah, it's an extremely thrilling fight. It's changing its course every now and then." Everyone had thought that Emperor Chen would gain upper hand since the start. However, he fell into Yi Shiwen's trap and has been forced into a disadvantageous position. Yi Shiwen has played him quite miserably. Someone acknowledged. Emperor Chen would have been thoroughly defeated by Yi Shiwen if he hadn't displayed his spatial ability at the last moment. After all, Yi Shiwen had displayed an extremely terrifying combat strength. Nobody had thought that Emperor Chen wouldn't be able to suppress Yi Shiwen even after he had displayed his spatial ability. Moreover, they had never anticipated that Yi Shiwen would still be the first one to land a blow and injure Emperor Chen again. This outcome had left everyone in shock. In fact, they simply couldn't accept it. This Yi Shiwen is far too powerful. Even a guy like Emperor Chen can't suppress him with his spatial ability. Someone spoke up. Yi Shiwen is far too strong. Look at his wings. I don't know what kind of magical ability this is, but his wings are too terrifying and ridiculously fast. Isn't it some kind of an ancient magical ability? This Yi Shiwen is very lucky. Someone had guessed how many magical abilities Yi Shiwen must have obtained to turn so ridiculously strong. This person obviously became very envious. A person could be on their way to be ranked as a Heaven's Pride expert if they could obtain even one of the magical abilities that Yi Shiwen possessed. Not to mention that so many of these magical abilities had concentrated together in the hands of one person. So, it wasn't surprising that Yi Shiwen had become so strong. Yi Shiwen didn't relax after he injured Emperor Chen. He knew that Emperor Chen was hiding within the space and was waiting for his injuries to heal. However, knowing this was also useless. Everyone knew this, but this knowledge was still useless. It seemed as if Yi Shiwen would tear the space and burst into the subspace. However, that would result in his body getting torn into pieces by the chaos energy. Even the great sage experts wouldn't dare to do that because the chaos energy was too frightening. The rumors suggested that the chaos energy was the mother energy of everything. In other words, all things in the 10,000 worlds had evolved out from the chaos energy. An Almighty had created this universe in the chaos. And this universe had come to be known as 10,000 worlds. This explains how the chaos energy had become incredibly famous as the mother energy of everything, and how tyrannical this energy was in reality. A person could only walk inside it unhampered, but only if they possessed tyrannical strength. However, it would a dead end for a person of Yi Shiwen's strength if he were to dare to go in. In fact, he would die instantly, and his body would be reduced to dust. However, people who possess spatial ability could freely travel back and forth in the chaos. Of course, this was because they had an innate affinity for space. So, the power of space would protect them from getting eroded by the chaos. Some special physiques could also move in the chaos freely. However, the people with such special physiques were very rare and had natural affinity for chaos energy since birth. They could even command the chaos energy to attack when they faced a powerful opponent. And the lower the opponent's cultivation, the scarier it would get for them. That's because the people with lower cultivation held lesser resistance towards chaos energy. So, this scenario was very dreadful for them. Yi Shiwen knew how dreadful the chaos energy was. So, he didn't dare to approach it even though he possessed the gilded tyrant form. To be continued. Chapter 462. He wasn't afraid of being infected by small amounts of chaos energy. However, he would die if he were to burst into the chaos. Therefore, he must be extremely cautious. Emperor Qin might appear at any time, and Emperor would have recovered to his peak condition by the time he would reappear. So, he would give a fatal blow as soon as he would reappear. Therefore, this fight would drag on indefinitely if Yi Shiwen couldn't kill Emperor Qin sooner. This may turn into a long, protracted fight. One of the spectators observed, Yi Shiwen can't stay this vigilant for a long time. And Emperor Qin can't continue like this either. He can't remain hidden inside the chaos for very long. Emperor Qin could escape inside the subspace since he possessed the spatial ability. However, he couldn't do it for very long unless he was a devil god who had lived in the chaos during the Chaos Era. Those who had bathed in the sacred lake a few times could also achieve this feat, however. Only these aforementioned people could stay longer in the chaos than those with spatial ability. Whoosh! Emperor Qin reappeared on the right side of Yi Shiwen. He looked somewhat fierce. A murderous look flashed in his eyes. He brandished his lance, and it released endless divine beams. They beams swept across the sky. They then crashed down like a huge star. This spectacle looked extremely terrifying. Blood-red rays of light erupted from the body of the golden lion. The skin on his body had begun to crack slightly. In fact, veins had started to pop out of its flesh. Its face had turned extremely grim. It seemed as if it was enduring unbearable pain. Rumble! The lance issued boundless aura. It seemed as if a god had raised his lance. Emperor Qin's aura had restored to its peak state. Rumble! Yi Shiwen raised his long sword to welcome the incoming attack. The long sword collided with the lance and set off boundless energy storms. The white jade stage under their feet gradually began to disintegrate. An endless amount of debris was flung around as a result, and the surrounding air curved and distorted. Everyone became terrified when they saw this scene. The bodies of the disciples of younger generation had turned ice cold. These two individuals possessed very formidable strength. Who could contend against them in such a bloody battle of life and death? Both of them were extremely intrepid, and everyone was scared to see them. Everyone compared themselves with these two individuals, but they felt that their bodies had turned cold. In fact, it was a hair-raising feeling of terror. Yi Shiwen condensed a seal attack, and the inverting ocean seal poured down towards Emperor Qin to crush him. Yi Shiwen had used the same old formidable attacks. Buried sword secrets, the inverting ocean seal. These were very frightening martial arts. Each of them could scare a person to death. And these attacks had unleashed an incredible power in the hands of Yi Shiwen at this time. Buried sword secrets could bury anything, the heaven included. So, what was a mere human being? It could bury the heaven, bury the earth, bury a person, and bury all mortal creatures once it had been practiced to the peak. One sword strike could eliminate all living things in its path. It looked like an ordinary sword attack that didn't carry an outstanding, imposing aura. However, it had broken Emperor Qin's defense with an irresistible force. The inverting ocean seal smashed down as well. It was a dreadful seal technique. The inverting ocean seal and Han's seal were completely different. The Han's seal contained brute force, so it would carry irresistible force while it would smash down on someone. However, the inverting ocean seal was different from the Han's seal. It was gentle like seawater. It was kind and soft like the steady flow of water. However, it was also inwardly sinister and could bring about a destructive flood. So, it was a much more profound attack when compared to the Han's seal. It coupled strength and gentleness. The dreadful great seal smashed down. It appeared as if a boundless ocean had been overturned. The steadiness of this attack was very scary. Emperor Chen raised his lance to resist. However, he felt an unimaginable force being transferred into his hand through his lance. His hand almost broke off. The muscles in his hand exploded and spattered along with his blood. Everyone got scared when they saw this. Emperor Chun had already tasted loss once, so he couldn't possibly repeat the same mistake again. He dodged sideways to avoid the attack. Then, he transformed into a yellow light and disappeared inside the space. Yi Shiwen wasn't worried this time. He revealed faint a smile on his face on the contrary. He had finally found his opponent's weakness. The golden lion had already overused its ability, so its body would collapse very soon as a result. Traveling back and forth in the restricted space of the metropolis Marshall Peak must have been a very strenuous task for the golden lion, despite the fact that it possessed the spatial ability. In fact, it must have pushed itself to perform these sneak attacks. It's not good. I'm afraid that Emperor Chun may not be able to last long at this rate. Yi Shiwen possesses a very sharp eyesight. Many sage-level core disciples were present among the spectators. Everyone knew what level of people they were. They could clearly see that Emperor Chun had been forced into a corner. In fact, he might not be able to use the spatial ability for long. In other words, he would be the one to collapse if he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen soon. And it would be of no use even if he were to escape into the space, because he would be torn apart by the chaos once the golden lion were to perish. He was running out of time as the matter stood. The Lord of the Muddy Sky Island had already become nervous atop the tall platform. He wasn't nervous at first since he was very confident about Emperor Chun. He believed that Emperor Chun would defeat Yi Shiwen. However, he realized that he was overconfident about Emperor Chun after having watched the fight. Yi Shiwen's tyranny had gone far beyond his imagination. It's impossible. Emperor Chun has condensed 999 Tao principles, and each of these principles is at least 10 times thicker than that of an ordinary person. He can be considered at the peak in the younger generation with such strength. One doesn't even need to include the spatial ability in this equation. Then, why does he seem so vulnerable in front of Yi Shiwen? The Lord of the Muddy Sky Island exclaimed in disbelief. He had confidence on Emperor Chun at the start of the fight. However, that confidence hadn't sources from his spatial ability alone. Emperor Chen's spatial ability was his hidden trump card. He had never revealed this ability before. Therefore, even the Lord of this island didn't know about this. The reason behind such confidence was Emperor Chen's inherent tyrannical strength. He had condensed 999 Tao principles, and each of these principles was at least 10 times thicker than that of an ordinary person. Therefore, calling him invincible in the semi-sage realm wouldn't be an overstatement. This was the main reason behind the Lord's confidence. Even someone who had the same strength as Emperor Chen wouldn't be able to prevail over him. It'd be a tie at the most. However, Emperor Chen looked very vulnerable in front of Yi Shiwen. What was going on? What the hell is this? What's going on? Everyone was perplexed, especially the disciples of the Muddy Sky Island. They had seen Emperor Chen's might in the past. Moreover, Emperor Chen hadn't even revealed the spatial ability back then. However, he had defeated each of his opponents and had earned himself the title of the undisputed king of EC. He had achieved that by relying on his invincible strength alone, nothing else. That fight between him and Qin Wang had been very devastating. However, everyone believed that Emperor Qin would kill Qin Wang even if they would engage in a bitter struggle. Both of them had condensed 999 Tao principles. However, If Qin Huang was elite among elites, then Emperor Chun was the king of kings. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't used some shameful tricks. He had suppressed Emperor Qin's counterattack by depending on his own strength. And such strength was truly dreadful. Such intrepid strength didn't look like that of a semi-sage expert. In fact, it seemed as if Emperor Qin was fighting against a sage expert since he didn't have enough power to fight back. As Yi Shiwen reached the sage realm, a bold disciple speculated. That's impossible. Yi Shiwen doesn't possess the unique aura of a sage expert. He's still in the semi-sage realm. He hasn't entered the sage realm yet. A sage-level core disciple shook his head and replied. The sage experts were very susceptible towards the unique aura of the sage realm. Therefore, a sage expert couldn't conceal his strength from another sage expert, even if he had suppressed his true power. It's like an adult can't become a child no matter how much they pretend to be one. An adult will always look like an adult, even if one would chop their legs and shorten their height to make it equivalent to that of a child. The semi-sage experts use preliminary principles. However, the principles of the semi-sage experts were disordered and unorganized. There was no connection between each principle. However, this wasn't the case with sage experts. The principles of the sage experts were scattered, but not unorganized. A mysterious and inexorable force kept the magical symbols of these principles bound together. And these principles would come into play together as soon as an attack was launched by a sage expert. It would carry endless might compared to a semi-sage expert's attack, since the principles would act one at a time in the case of the latter. And this difference was even greater than the one between cloud and mud. However, Yi Shiwen's principles didn't appear to be bounded together. They still looked somewhat unorganized and disordered. So how's this possible? Someone asked doubtfully. How could Yi Shiwen be so powerful? Yi Shiwen knew that Emperor Chun had escaped into the subspace. He also knew that he could slowly push Emperor Chun towards his death by passing time. However, he couldn't become careless with it, and he couldn't delay too much. Therefore, Yi Shiwen finally decided against concealing his true power. Thus, his principles began to soar into the sky one after another. Then, they began to twine around him. 900, 997, 998, 999, 1,000. What? How's this possible? Yi Shiwen's principles soared into the sky and began to revolve around him. Someone counted the number of principles on his body, but the count reached 1,000 Tao principles. That person thought that he must have made some mistake. So, he counted again. However, he still found out the count to be at 1,000 Tao principles. The gasping sound started to resound one after another. Everyone believed that 999 Tao principles was the absolute upper limit in the semi-sage realm for a human expert. However, Yi Shiwen had condensed 1,000 Tao principles. This had gone beyond everyone's imagination. How's this possible? Everyone was shocked. The Lord of the Muddy Sky Island stood up from his seat. Little to nothing could have moved him this much when one take his cultivation into consideration. However, he had been frightened to such an extent that he had jumped up from his seat. He actually has 1,000. The Lord of the Xianyuan Palace Hall also saw this scene. A strong, murderous intention flickered in his eyes, apart from the obviously shocked look. This is the so-called matter of something so abnormal can only be a demon's doing. But this evil genius isn't even one of my subordinates. So, I will have to find a way to eradicate him. An unfathomable killing intention flashed in the eyes of the Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave, the Lord of Muddy Sky Island, and the other experts of the various other big forces, even though these other forces hadn't participated in this competition. To be continued. Chapter 463. They found it inconceivable to know that Yi Shiwen had condensed 1,000 Tao principles. They believed that condensing 999 Tao principles was the limit. However, he had condensed 1,000 Tao principles. Such strength could scare a person to death. This had already exceeded their expectations. A champion would emerge in every 100 years. However, it was quite difficult for those people to pose a threat to a person of the Lord of the Xian Yuan Palace Hall's rank. None of the previous champions had made him feel a sense of crisis. After all, talent was one thing, and smoothly growing to such an altitude was another. However, his killing intention had risen very steeply after he had realized that Yi Shiwen had condensed 1,000 Dao principles. In fact, the murderous intention was clearly visible in his eyes. He had a premonition in his mind that a person like Yi Shiwen could pose enormous threat to the Xian Yuan Palace Hall in the future if they ignored him and allowed him to grow up. The Supreme Lord would have discovered his unconcealed, killing intention on ordinary days. However, he was also in shock at this time. He obviously hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen had condensed 1,000 Dao principles. Only sage experts could accomplish this feat. In fact, 1,000 Dao principles was the beginning of the sage realm. Yi Shiwen had 1,000 Dao principles, but his 1,000 Dao principles and a sage expert's 1,000 Dao principles were two entirely different things. A sage expert's 1,000 Dao principles would be scattered, but not disorganized. Moreover, the overall might of these principles would be endless. Therefore, the same 1,000 Dao principles would be far more tyrannical than those of Yi Shiwen's. This was the precise reason that had made him realize that Yi Shiwen hadn't made the breakthrough into the sage realm yet. However, this fact was even more stunning. It wouldn't have been strange for him if Yi Shiwen had become a sage expert. Moreover, he was also very surprised by Yi Shiwen's growth speed. These juniors of the younger generation had merely begun their cultivation journey, as far as he was concerned. So, it didn't matter if they were a bit quick or a bit slower. One would be able to catch up with the others as long as they could come across some fortuitous adventures. However, Yi Shiwen had accomplished this in the semi-sage realm itself. This showed that Yi Shiwen might have astonishing potential, a potential which he wasn't aware of. His vision gradually turned resolute as he thought of this. Yi Shiwen hadn't heard people's comments. However, he felt that many tyrannical gazes had been sweeping over his body since the moment he had released his 1,000 Dao principles. In fact, he felt as if these knife-like sharp gazes would cut open wounds in his body. In fact, he believed that these gazes would have been enough to kill him if he weren't inside the true martial university. However, he had already thought about this at the time when he had decided to reveal his 1,000 Dao principles. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to settle Emperor Qin's matter, once and for all, and he didn't wish to delay any further. So, he must use his entire strength to kill Emperor Qin. A crazy idea had secretly popped up in his heart. He knew that many forces would wish to get rid of him soon after he would reveal his true strength. He didn't believe in the saying that a tall tree attracts the strong winds. However, that very same proverb also spoke that those very trees tend to grow even stronger and faster after they've survived through the rainstorm. And they become far superior to the plants which have grown in the safety of a greenhouse. He wanted to take advantage of these external strong winds in order to temper himself and become even more tyrannical. Let the storm be even more violent. He felt that the world before his eyes had suddenly become much clearer after he had released his full strength. Many principles had remained hidden thus far, but they had unfolded themselves before his eyes at this time. Yi Shiwen noticed that a golden ray of light was flickering in front of his eyes. It appeared like a golden strand of hair that was floating in the sky. It was even issuing slight fluctuations of spatial power. Could it be that the golden lion was setting the coordinates with the help of these golden hairs? Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. Suddenly, everything became clear in front of his eyes. He had been thinking that one must possess spatial coordinates in order to travel back and forth in the space since the chaos flowed in the subspace. One may take a small step into the subspace. However, they might arrive at an unknown place when they would reappear in the main space. It was also possible to get lost inside the flowing chaos as a result. A powerhouse wouldn't need this kind of a positioning system because they could see the main space from the subspace. However, it should have been impossible for this immature golden lion to achieve that in the restricted space of the metropolis Marshall Peak. Therefore, Yi Shiwen had been wondering about what the Golden Lion had been using for fixing the coordinates. And he realized what that thing was when he saw the golden hair. Whoosh! Emperor Chen suddenly reappeared. But Yi Shiwen was already prepared. In fact, he noticed that the hair of the Golden Lion issued a spatial array at the spot where Emperor Chen had appeared. I see. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He brandished his sword. The sword energy soared into the sky like a rainbow and instantly swept down like a giant golden dragon. Emperor Chen disappeared hastily as soon as he saw that Yi Shiwen had discovered him. This battle is already decided. It will be very difficult for Emperor Chen to make a comeback, even though he possesses the spatial ability. It's not that he's not enough strong. Rather, Yi Shiwen is extremely powerful. 1,000 Tao Principles in Semi-Sage Realm. I've never heard of this, someone said regretfully. Everyone in the surroundings looked at him. He turned out to be a disciple of the Muddy Sky Island. He had lost his confidence on Emperor Chen. His expression had made it evident that he had been stunned by Yi Shiwen. Yeah, Yi Shiwen has constantly maintained himself at his peak condition. His secret healing technique is also exceptional. He doesn't even need to keep himself at his peak state for a long time. He only needs to do it for a bit longer than Emperor Chen. Emperor Chen can't go on like this for long. He'll get exhausted soon, so he must attack with the entirety of his strength and as early as possible. Otherwise, he may not need to attack Yi Shiwen later since he'll die inside the space's chaos. Someone had clearly understood what this scene represented. Emperor Chen's strength is on the level of previous champions. He would have won if he hadn't encountered a freak like Yi Shiwen. All I can say that he's very unlucky. Yi Shiwen suddenly moved to the middle of the arena for some unknown reason. Then, he brandished his long sword and unleashed the Buried Heaven sword attack. A seemingly endless sword light burst out as a result. The attack spread in midair and went straight towards an empty spot. The spectators were baffled by this. After all, Yi Shiwen had acted like some crazy guy who had issued the sword attack towards an empty spot where no one was present. The space suddenly began to fluctuate violently after Yi Shiwen launched the attack. Then, Emperor Chen's figure reappeared in front of the sword attack. Emperor Chen realized that a giant sword was already present in front of him as soon as he appeared. His complexion turned pale as a result. He didn't understand how his whereabouts had been ascertained. How was it possible? How had Yi Shiwen discovered his whereabouts? Pucci. Emperor Chen didn't get enough time to think. Yi Shiwen's long sword had already cut into his shoulder. Emperor Chen's body was extremely intrepid and could be compared with metals and stones. However, it was like butter in front of this dreadful sword intention and got cut as a result. Blood splashed out and showered down to the ground. Each drop of blood opened a small pit in the ground. This scene was exceptionally terrifying. Emperor Chen's entire arm had been chopped off. It had seemed that his entire body would be cut into two halves by Yi Shiwen's sword. However, he had snorted eerily and had maneuvered his body to shift sideways in order to avoid this fatal sword strike at that critical moment. However, his entire arm had still been cut off by Yi Shiwen. His blood was gushing out like a fountain. Emperor Chen's complexion had turned pale. He promptly urged his Golden Lion and disappeared into the space once again. This entire scene had taken place in a split second. No one had anticipated that they would see such a scene. An arm of the incomparably tyrannical Emperor Chen had been chopped off by Yi Shiwen's sword. Moreover, this hadn't even been the most surprising spectacle for most people. They were mostly surprised by the fact that Yi Shiwen had ascertained Emperor Chen's whereabouts in advance. One must know that Emperor Chen's spatial ability hadn't been able to take advantage of Yi Shiwen so far because Yi Shiwen's reaction speed was fast enough. In fact, Yi Shiwen's attacks would always impact first even though he would attack second. However, it was different this time. Everyone had seen that Yi Shiwen had attacked first. Yi Shiwen had brandished his sword first. Then, Emperor Chen had appeared right at that spot. In fact, it had seemed as if both of them were coordinating with each other. It was as if Emperor Chen had presented himself before Yi Shiwen's sword so that Yi Shiwen could kill him. It seemed as if both of them had sparred together many a times. Yi Shiwen had brandished his sword, and Emperor Chun had voluntarily appeared before it to get chopped off. Everyone obviously wouldn't think that they were coordinating with each other. So there was only one possibility, and that was that Yi Shiwen had seen through Emperor Chen's whereabouts. In fact, he might have predicted it in advance. This was extremely dreadful. The spatial ability was the most dreadful ability because one could appear and disappear in an unpredictable fashion with the help of this ability. A person with spatial ability could easily hide inside the subspace and could then look for the most appropriate opportunity to attack. However, Emperor Chen suddenly appeared defenseless in front of Yi Shiwen since he had unexpectedly lost the advantage of this ability. There wasn't any suspense left in this battle. Yi Shiwen suddenly found a tiny golden hair floating away at an astonishing speed at this time. So, he realized that Emperor Chun must be trying to escape. Emperor Chun had repeatedly faced defeats against Yi Shiwen. However, he was still very strong. So, it would become very troublesome for Yi Shiwen if he managed to escape. Yi Shiwen decided against waiting any further. He shouted loudly. The heavenly source mirror within his body suddenly released an astonishing blood column. The scarlet energy began to boil and flooded within Yi Shiwen's body. Then, the heavenly source mirror integrated into his body, and he felt that his entire body had started to brim with power. Hidden dragon rises from the abyss. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. A tinge of scarlet appeared on his golden hands. His hands suddenly transformed into a pair of dragon's claws, and he ripped open a huge crack in the space with these claws. The one-armed Emperor Chen appeared in front of Yi Shiwen as a result. He was about to escape when he discovered that Yi Shiwen had suddenly appeared in front of him. Puchi! The sword energy condensed into a huge sword. It started from the top of Emperor Chen's head and ran through his body as it pierced downward. Emperor Chen and his mount had been crucified in the chaos. To be continued. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.